Hello, David McMillan here. From time to time, I give interviews with other people. You've seen plenty from Sean Atwood, and I've got those up on their own playlist. But there's a kind of little collection bubbling around of interviews with, people I usually only see once. And sometimes, I try and shift them onto subjects not covered by other things. I do take you into consideration. So this series will be other people's stuff. Yeah, Francis, he does LetsDoHumans, all sorts of people.
So, for instance, going back to the incident that I said happened to me in regards to the shooting, after that, I kind of straightened out my life a bit. And so in order to make sense of what happened, I'm like, okay, that was meant to happen in order for me to become a changed person and not get caught up in a particular lifestyle. And that happened very early on in my life. I was 17 when it happened.
Anything that's interesting. Maybe I'm living a simulation, and this is part of the act.
And it was your turn, yeah. Humans our desire to create meaning around stuff is really, really interesting and intriguing, because the more I read into like psychology, and in particularly I've been reading a lot of Jordan Peterson's work, and the pursuit for meaning is one of those things that kind of draw us to the divine. It's like we need to find that thing that kind of makes sense for everything else that's happening along in our lives. So
it must be, mustn't it? I mean, you think of almost any society or culture, they will in the absence of any understanding of how something's come to be, they'll find something and hook it onto a supernatural one.
Most definitely.
And I guess there's some comfort in that. It's a bit like conspiracy theories. They're always fairly dark and evil, fine, and the usual culprits are up there, Bill Gates and all of that. But I think it's something that people take comfort in. The idea that instead of a world with Donald Trump-like leaders stumbling around, who tweeting off their commands, there's actually somebody who knows what the hell he's doing.
They do it,
And evil or not, at least that somebody's got a plan, as opposed to randomness. That certainly must be. I must say, there've been times in my life when I've felt that myself. Should I introduce myself a little?
Yes, please do. Yeah,
okay.
Please do. I know we're just sort of like.
We're just having a little warm up here. But,
warm up, just get to understand.
You never know. There's always the danger one of us might say something useful, and then we've got it in the wrong spot. So okay, Francis, good to meet you. David
nice to meet you,
McMillan.
David. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, actually. First of all, before you go ahead and introduce us, I want to thank you for taking the invitation on, because I'm sure you're an extremely busy individual at the moment. And I've been following your story for a while, and it's super intriguing. So I was just blown away by the fact that you accepted my invitation. So first of all, thank you for coming onto the podcast and sharing your story.
It's a pleasure to be here, really. You can imagine normally Sunday is a day to worship the Lord and all his works, but my relations with the Almighty have been a bit ragged over the years.
We're going to get to that.
don't seem to have that. But indeed, for those who don't know me, I was a career smuggler for over 40 years. Began back in the hippie area in the 70s. In which we all believed that the world was wrong, we were right, a very common belief amongst 17, 18-year-olds, and that all drugs should be legal and turn everybody on. And since they weren't, and there was a bit of money to be made, let's go get some. So was it a good career? I don't know. It was interesting, but I had several big arrests. I began smuggling all sorts of things, gold into India, even video recording heads, wherever there was a difference in some kind of margin between borders. Then Thai sticks, opium, heroin, cocaine. I was pretty open-minded about that. And of course, people think, oh, you can't get any worse than heroin. Well, of course, along the way, I picked up a couple of accidental drug habits, being so close to it and having it around me all the time. Just killing time in hotel rooms somewhere in Asia, waiting for the man to turn up. I'll just have a little line of this and a line of that. And then you get back home and must have picked up a flu somewhere. My legs are kicking. No, I didn't want a whiskey, spat it out, couldn't eat a sandwich. I know, I'll have a bit of that shit that I brought back. Oh, wait a minute, David, what have you got? But I suppose the advantage of doing it in a from source country backwards, that I wasn't too much on the front line, but also had quite a bit of experience, especially in Australia, going straight from source countries down onto the street level. Have you lost me? Oh no, I'm still here.
No, you're still here, yeah.
But that was also a bit of an education as well. But I was a bit of a kind of soft-hearted dealer in a way. I'd find myself at 3 o'clock in the morning driving out to see somebody who was sick. And I also kind of learnt that you can't be, you won't last long if you're some kind of ruthless maniac. A lot of kids of a certain generation thought, well, I'll go into a narcotics business. And the first thing they'd do is to go to a hardware store and buy a chainsaw and a splash guard. But I got arrested in a massive trial that took place in Australia. Ran for 6 months, 119 witnesses. It was a conspiracy because there were no drugs found. But there was nobody came forward to say, yes, he sold me drugs. And I guess that, in a sense, was, better to have in a kind of ruthless business to have some sort of ethics to it. But looking back on it, of course, I think I spent probably one way or another over 20 years in prisons.
That's across various continents as well, right?
Yes. Only half of that convicted, the rest waiting trial. And twice facing a death penalty, including in Bangkok in Thailand. And okay, it's rare that they execute a Westerner. But I think they were going to do it in my case because unusually the Australian and the British governments were supplying material to the Thais to help me get convicted.
Did they want you to get convicted in Thailand? Did they prefer that, do you reckon?
Yes, they
because of the severity of the sentence.
Well, I think it was the when was that? 93, 94, 95. They thought it was about time that a bit of one of somebody who looked like a regular sort of citizen was executed, just to say, it can happen. It was by machine gun in those days.
Yeah.
They used to give you a bunch of flowers, and you got to say some prayers, and a bit of string was tied to the machine gun, which was attached to a bench with 3 bits of string and 3 officers pulling at it, so that it spared them the idea that any particular one of them had provided the
okay, I see. Yeah, so it avoids them of the guilt.
Yeah. I guess perhaps they were trying to work it into the Buddhists' belief system. I'm not too sure whether that would fit too well.
Yeah.
But so facing that likelihood, I escaped from there in what was quite difficult, but I also had a bit of luck. Then went on and found myself a few years later in a similar situation in Karachi in Pakistan. Death wouldn't have been very likely in that, but I was fairly badly mistreated. I was tortured there, which again doesn't happen to Europeans too often. But and I'd started to think that I just can't, win at this thing.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because I wasn't willing to put the work and to try and take the precautions, but I mean, for one of them, that Thailand thing, I took elaborate stuff. Francis, I had 2 passports, and they were very carefully put together so that nobody knew about them. And despite all of that, a bunch of unlikely circumstances came about. In this case, it was the American DEA testing some equipment in
Yeah.
I found myself arrested, and I almost felt like fate was working against me. So I guess that was about as dark as the despair of a god, and I was suicidal for quite a while. I mean, I wanted to
I can
escape,
imagine. Yeah.
but I mostly wanted to escape to get out, go to the Dusitani Hotel, because I knew how to get to the roof there and jump off it.
Oh wow. There's something that intrigues me about you, because I've watched quite a few of your videos. I've also just recently watched the documentary, or the movie/documentary, which is absolutely amazing, Made in Australia. And one thing I realized about you, even speaking to you now, is that your level of IQ, you're well spoken, you're a super intelligent individual. Someone like you, were you in the game for the money, or were you in it because you knew how to play the system and you enjoy the actual ride of it? Because there's something the reason why I'm asking, because I've spoken to several individuals who've been involved in the trafficking industry or been gangsters and so forth, and those individuals tend to be very high IQ individuals, and to them the thrill comes from being able to beat a system which almost seems unbeatable. So it's not necessarily the money. They never really talk about the money. It's never the case of, oh, I was making millions a week or millions a month. It's always, I managed to get away. I knew they were after me. I played this game on them and I played that. And it was quite similar to your story. So what was it for you? What was the driving factor?
I think there's very much a great part of that is similar for me. A bunch of us were. I met some crooks by chance, and they were mostly safecrackers and robbers, but they were going to the drug business, and they were talking about, would it be possible to import? Now, the more they said, no, it's too dangerous, or it can't be done, or such and such had a bad experience. And I took a couple of experimental trips and then laid out what the difficulties were. The more people said, this can't be done. Yeah, I was same as the guys you've been talking to. I thought, no, that's not right. It can be.
Yeah.
Now, what is that? Just arrogance, or sort of thinking yourself of the center of the universe, or what? Not entirely. No, I think many of my readers and people who watch my channel on YouTube, they are kind of like, I guess, armchair smugglers, in the sense that it's something that I think many people have thought about it. And when I was recruiting couriers, so many of them, and the best of them, were not crooks by nature, or not involved in crime. The best of them were just kind of regular citizens, if there is such a thing as a regular citizen. But
law-abiding citizens, initially.
Yeah, that they'd been at airports, and I think you could ask at an airport, when you're surrounded by that system of security, it would tell people, ask themselves, I don't know, could I get through? Or they watch somebody hit, and how many times you think, Francis, if when you've seen something unfortunate happen to somebody, they've been pounced on by police or something like that, of course we ask ourselves, what would I have done?
Yeah.
Would there be a way to avoid that situation? So, and even in movies and books, we kind of doesn't matter whether the person's the hero of the story or the bad guy.
Mm.
If the situation seems sort of hopeless or difficult, we want to see whether they'll get out. You think of everybody just about knows the Battle of Stalingrad. Germans have gone in the wrong time of year, and they fought over a city they should have bypassed. And so many people are often asking on those question forums, what could they have done, to get out of it? Now, it doesn't matter that they were on the other side to us. In the same way that I don't think it matters that the villain's on the other side. You do ask yourself, can you get out of it? And I think I took my kind of pleasure in it, I guess, was the research, the planning, and then finding a solution. Now, once the thing had been tested and worked, it was a kind of a strange downer. Like, well, if
once you completed a mission, you mean you felt down?
Well, I remember one where I noticed that at Sydney Airport, there was a number of flights that were domestic from city to city within Australia and then flew on to foreign destinations. Now, when they were within the country, the passengers got a kind of domestic pass if they were getting off again, say they went Melbourne, Sydney. And if they wanted to, if they had a reason to, they could even take their bags off before flying on to the next foreign place. And they'd show this little slip, and you've just come from a national location, and out you go. So I thought, well, surely there'd be a way of making it look like that's what you were. And there was. It was a matter of somebody, if I imagine we transpose it, we say that there's Paris-London flights all the time, every day. Nobody's likely to get hit on one of those. But if Francis's courier, if I can give you a few, takes off at Bangkok and is ticketed through to Paris and then on to London, if somebody boards the same flight at Paris and picks up his bag through and then goes out, and they say, well, where have you been? Now, there's some technicalities, but this just makes it interesting. The bag that he picks up will have no green stripe on it. The green stripe, you've probably noticed on bags, means you've come from Europe. So I gave people from time to time bags which had under the handle the baggage check, which they could, once they picked up the bag, they could remove the one that had been in use from Bangkok, just put it off, and pull a little strip, and it would
from a country of no threat.
To appear to have come from somewhere that was not suspicious. Now, here's the point. When I usually, just about always did the test myself with something new. And I got back and I had my few kilos in there. And it had come from Cali in Colombia in this case. Now, you'd think I'd be happy or relieved or something, but as soon as I walked out of that door, I'd say to myself, right, it worked. I was correct. And then, so what?
On to the next challenge. Do you feel deflated that it was too easy at the time?
I know, but I was also a little insulated in as much as I'd picked up some pretty good mid-level contacts, so that I would charge about, well, let's just say, I don't know, a kilo of Coke today is worth 38,000 or something like that. Apparently it's gone up a bit since C19. Quality right through the floor. But if you're willing to sell it to a wholesaler for just 30, you'll be given good treatment and protected. Because whoever takes it from you at that price doesn't want anything to happen to you. In fact, you find yourself that they'll be very careful with people get greedy, and they forget to value themselves highly enough in a mercenary world. Whereas even you can imagine if some desperado criminal who's likely to do anything if the opportunity is there, if you're charging just regular rates or high rates, he's got a particular reason to value you above everybody else.
Yeah.
So that if he's looking for somebody to target and thinks, I know that guy would have built up a bit of money, I'm going to engineer a situation where get a honey trap and find out where he keeps his money, or kidnap his mum, or God knows what. If you're worth quite a lot because you give the best deal, you don't have any of that problem. It's very unlikely. So I could just, because I wasn't super obsessed about the money, I could afford to pay my associates and helpers very well.
Yeah.
And also there'd be enough money around to, if they got into trouble. I always offered that option that I think it's only happened twice, but in those occasions where somebody does end up being arrested, there was a great courier. He was known as the Lollipop Man because he looked like one of those guys that holds the
We'll help the kids cross the road
sign, on the thing. He just had that face. He couldn't get arrested, really. But he walked in at Barranquilla airport on the day that the Federales had a big army operation there, and they were just pulling everybody to bits.
Yeah.
And he had a couple of kilos in shoes and ended up arrested. But the good thing about operating around that level, you can go straight in the next day and say, look, here's your options. We can you can hang around a bit, you will be treated well. We put him in, managed to get him transferred to the hospital section, outside hospital, so he was not even in the prison at all. Because Barranquilla prison, you can imagine, is a bit not for the faint-hearted. It's kind of run by the guys in there. They wouldn't be in there if they were big enough, and so they're not really, and they're very, they've got factions and gangs and all the other kind of entertainments that people have in those places. So he was, got the Lollipop Man back in within 3 weeks. His biggest fear, oddly enough, was once he was out, because he'd overstayed the visa. This had taken a few weeks. He was more fearful of crossing the border on an expired visa than he was ever running around with kilos of cocaine. We had to put him on a boat that was going over to Panama. He said it was a pretty rough crossing, and most of the other passengers were sort of paying their way by taking 8 or 10 ounces of Charlie over with them. But that is some, that is always pleasing too, that you don't lose anybody in that way, because I found too that people are kind of tested to their limits when they're out of their environment entirely. I mean, most people probably think, I've seen a few programs about prisons. It'd be annoying, but I guess I could cope with being locked up in a UK prison. But if, let's just say we had to face a prison in Lagos, I don't think that...
It'd be very different, most definitely. When I was watching Made in Australia, to me, it felt like a mix between sort of like Narcos and Catch Me If You Can. I'm not sure if you've seen both of those films.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the reason why I made the reference to Catch Me If You Can is because you had this ingenious way of evading the police, and there was one story in particular, and I wanted to know if it was as accurate on the show as it was in real life, and that was the transaction at the maternity ward. Can you explain that story a bit for me? Because I
Well,
found it very
this was
intriguing and ingenious.
I was in touch with ᴀᴏ who wrote the screenplay for that.
Mm,
I didn't get anything about it. You know, people are under the illusion that they have some control over their own life stories. You know, that
mm,
somebody could write your biography; it wouldn't be official. Nothing you could do about it much.
mm,
Um, but I thought better to be a little involved than not. And it seemed because this had happened at the Mercy Hospital in Melbourne, it seemed probably they should use that.
mm,
There were a few changes made. This was the situation. I'd kind of retired for at 24, which is a good age for retirement, I think. Um, but my friend and business partner, Michael, had kept going, and he was being all mysterious about the source of who gave him this Thai contact. Now, little Hassan used to travel around the world with these cutlery boxes, the
mm,
top layers of which were packed with compressed heroin.
mm,
Now, I thought, I did say to Michael, I said, you know what, you bought this contact off somebody. Somebody didn't want him anymore. Delivers to the door and sells for a quarter of the regular wholesale price. And so somebody didn't want, he wanted you to do the great favor of giving you this guy, you know. Well, he didn't give him to me. I had to pay 50,000. Yes, nonetheless, the guy's worth $1 million.
mm,
But anyway, um, I'd been under surveillance for a couple of years at the time, and so had Michael. The surveillance didn't really stop, even though I stopped doing things. But Michael came to me with this problem as follows. The Thai businessman courier had arrived in the country. They'd given him a bit of a check, let the cutlery boxes through. They were suspicious, but of course they very much wanted to know where this stuff was going. And they weren't absolutely sure it was in there. They let him go. He checked into a big hotel in town. Um, and Michael came to me and said, listen, Hassan's got kilos in these cutlery boxes. He's in the hotel with it now.
mm,
Um, you know, there's police everywhere. What should I do? Walk away from it or not? Well, this was the problem. Say you've got a task force operation following you
mm,
for a couple of years and they haven't produced any results. Are they going to go to their boss and say, well, you know, we haven't really got anything solid, we have to let it go?
mm,
Or are they going to be very determined? And they were, especially since, unbeknownst to us, they'd crept into his hotel room, drilled the boxes, knew the stuff was in there.
mm,
And I said to Michael, you can walk away from it. They will arrest him with the stuff and then arrest you and
mm,
use all of your communications with him as evidence um, in a conspiracy case. But I also realized for my own interest that they wouldn't stop at that. If I'd been followed around for 2 years, I'd be
yeah.
dragged in as well. And then again, there's nothing quite as grisly as an arrest where there isn't solid evidence.
Mm,
You um, you can imagine where a policeman is at his happiest when there's a smoking gun. When there isn't a clear-cut case, when there's no dead body and fingerprints all over,
yeah.
they're going to kind of use every slight thing to try and get an edge.
Mm,
So they got the idea that we were going to pick this stuff up, and I knew we had to at least do that. Um, and we needed to find a good place to do it. The hospital had one major advantage, well, a few really, apart from having 3 or 4 entrances and exits. It was in a radio dead zone. Um, the police at the time were using a VHF band, and you, the hospital was in a sort of well, and the amount of equipment and I don't know if you've ever noticed when you're in a hospital you can't get a good phone signal.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's in part due to I mean, they used to block them altogether, but they don't do that anymore because they need them. But they're bad anyway, and in this location they were terrible. So we went to see the Thai courier. Police turn up, we get rid of them. I went to my favorite radio supplier shop and got some new transmitters so that Michael and I could talk to each other, cut on frequencies just between the regular ones, so they wouldn't necessarily be able to lock onto them. And they would work within a small area. And also planted 2 cars nearby in that zone, and got myself. There were some other streets that were quite useful in that area. Some that were kind of dead ends. You know, they had those posts in the road to block them off from through traffic. A stand-up pole that locks. So everything was quite good for that. But remember, we had that this guy would not be able to help us. You know, he'd barely accept that he was under surveillance. So we went to the hospital in advance. He came, all the police are with him. I met him in the lobby. Michael's cruising around in his car at the time, waiting for my signal. I went to Hassan. I said, Hassan, look, there's a lot of police around today, but we're going ahead. You've got the thing with you? Yeah, here. No, hold on to it for a minute. Let's not get anybody, you know, getting overexcited just at this moment. Hassan, look at the flower shop over there. I've been here before. Normally it's a young girl who works this place and her mother, I think. But who's there today? Oh, some big guy. Yeah, big indeed. And the way he's cutting up those flowers, I think they're going to be a bit too short for any vase I've seen. He's not interested in sales. And then I pointed out, you know, a couple of other people in there, so he accepted that. So we had to be quick because they were having radio trouble, but by the time if they'd realized this is not working at all, they'd probably just say, well, everybody descend and try and get what you can. Took us out to the emergency entrances where the ambulances pull in. Michael came in that way, nearly skittled a couple of people, and ended up banging on the back of his car. He had some big American town car with a hotted up engine. I took Hassan to there, grabbed the cutlery boxes, threw them into Michael's window. He went into reverse, took off that way. The police started to put some trucks in front of the exit to try and block him getting out, but he was a pretty good driver and could drive backwards under control. Went out and spun around, and I took Hassan not through any of the exits, but to the back fences. So the film was a bit different. It had Clélia distracting them with
with a fake baby
in the pram. But even though we'd spent the night before looking at a lot of distractions, we knew only too well that the chances of police letting somebody go to save somebody else, even if it was a baby, were pretty small. Not only that, saving baby only takes less than 5 seconds. You either catch the pram or you don't. That doesn't give you as much lead time as you need. When it comes to there's really there could be a worthwhile crook's handbook on what to do with troublesome policemen, as they're fond about.
There was a heavy Bonnie and Clyde element to the movie. Is that how he played out in real life?
There was, because I knew I was being followed and bugged, there was a kind of a relationship there. Once I was just getting annoyed because I was having to take lots of zigzag stuff to get rid of the people following me. And I I led them into a blind alley and stopped, and then went back to the car that was doing the surveillance. And I said, look, this is my agenda for today. That's where I'm going. You can be happy with that or not. Now, you can go and do whatever you like. Now, I know that if you go back to your bosses and say, we just had this conversation, they're not going to like it and call you all sorts of names. So you probably won't. You'll go back at the end of the day and say, oh, we followed him here, there, and this will have never happened. But really, if you slow me down too much today, you'll be in the position where you'll have to do that because the other team members will know. I didn't even accept that I was under surveillance for a while because once we first realized we could listen in on the police frequencies, it was like a treasure chest of information was coming forward. I mean, even to this day, 168 megacycles, 0.250, that's the frequency the undercovers used to use. Their own communications.
Was that in the 70s or 80s?
Yes, up until the 90s when they switched to a kind of spread spectrum digital transmission, which I started to find bugs in my office and flats that didn't come up on the scanners, and I couldn't understand why. You know what I do. It's good for you, Francis. If you ever come under MI5 for being suspicious for being an activist, you'll know if somebody's put a bug. If you, we don't need a Polaroid anymore. There was an instant camera format, but just when you're leaving your office, take a snapshot. When you come back to your office, take another snapshot. Compare the two. I did that and discovered that. For no reason at all, a very heavy cabinet had been moved 3 inches. And I went and looked at the marks in the carpet, and sure enough it was. So I turned my radio up to disguise any noise, and then had to get a jack from the car to lift this thing. It was so heavy. And sure enough, they'd put a transmitter in there. And for the technically minded, it was a little aluminium box. But this was showing that the transition had begun from old-fashioned technology to much cleverer things. It was, I felt like I was diffusing a bomb getting into it, because it had a big, fat, welcoming Allen key screw in the middle, saying, come on, turn me. You can open me up here.
You don't know what's going to happen once you turn it.
I mean, all it was missing was suspenders and lipstick, and this thing was trying to be so alluring. Come and get me. But I was suspicious, and I used an angle grinder to shear down one end of it. And sure enough, where that Allen key had been put in was just a sideways bolt. If I'd turned it, it would have ground the inside of it to powder, so that I'd never find out what they were doing. But it still wasn't a lot of help. This kind of very high frequency stuff travels not very far, but very well through a lot of objects. It's very hard to pinpoint where they are. I would think if somebody had that kind of problem, they were being shadowed by a private eye for having an affair with the boss's wife. That's as clean as I can make this setup. One way you could, I'd sometimes find out if somebody was following me by doing what they hate, which is on foot. People drive around, and of course it's so easy that their high tech now is nothing better than a stripped down mobile phone with a speaker taken out and everything else stuffed in where the airbag goes behind your steering wheel. It takes its power off the car supply, so it goes constantly. and they've now got the GPS saying exactly where you are, and can even listen in on the call when they feel like.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I think modern technology makes that pretty much more simpler than it would have been during your time. Yeah.
You won't see too many scuff marks on a policeman's shoes anymore. There's not like they're walking around a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they got
take them
drones
for a
now
walk.
to do a lot of.
If
Sorry.
you do take them for that walk, you can go into some place that you know very well. Let's just say you know Knightsbridge, all the entrances and exits to Harrods. The situation they'll be in is they've got to abandon their cars. Don't like that anyway. They've got to go out on foot. Don't like that. They've got to be in communications in places which have got lots of dead zones. Don't like that. So they're likely to, you'll strike them getting too close to you. Now, what you do is get an envelope and put anything in it, but go to the dumpster around the back of the big store or whatever you're dragging them around. The one you're suspicious about, let him or her catch up. When you go to the dumpster, look around as though you're checking to make things clear. Fold the thing up and you put it, but where you slide it in, like it's a dead drop or something, you make a note of exactly how it went in, on what angle. So you line it up. Now, the following policeman, even if he didn't do it off his own bat, would say, look, looks like he's leaving a message for somebody. They'd all say, go and at least read it and put it back.
Yeah.
He'll never think until it's too late to put it back exactly
How he found it, yeah.
So you'd walk them around the various floors of the place and then go back an hour later. And if it's back there, but on the wrong angle, then you've got your answer. This old-fashioned stuff and a kind of old-school counter-surveillance things.
And they're still very prevalent, aren't they? There's something interesting about like crime in general. So when I look into crime, it seems that the idea or the conception is that crime is committed by either very poor people or people that are kind of forced into the life due to maybe socioeconomic or class reasons. When I looked into sort of a bit about your childhood and upbringing, it seemed that you had a fairly decent upbringing in terms of, I think your father was a war hero and your mother was a I don't know if war hero is too strong of a word, but I don't know. Your father was.
He was in the he was in the division. He got to the rank of major, but don't expect that means terribly much. It was a ranking because he controlled the radio jamming network and propaganda units just during the war and after. And he ended up working for Rediffusion, which was ITV before what it was today. So there was a divorce early, but nonetheless, I had a good upbringing. Loving parents, something that passes for an education. I had a couple of good teachers that always helped. Thrown out of a very good school. Misunderstanding with the chemistry teacher there.
It happens.
I
had a misunderstanding with my English teacher. So.
He seemed to think I wanted to whip up a batch of LSD. I don't know where he got that idea. Anyway, so here's the thing. I just speaking for myself, I probably always would have been a risk taker. I've got a low resting heartbeat and don't have a correctly balanced sense of risk, reward, and fear. So that makes people more inclined to take risks. But having spent 45 years or more underground and with a lot of people in a lot of different places and a lot of jails, I probably met 10,000 people in passing throughout jails. Is there anything to it that somebody is born into some hardship or in some country where there's it looks like they can never win by being honest. And would they be dishonest? Strangely enough, it doesn't seem to make the difference you would expect. It does in a minor way. I mean, you'll get somebody, you'll get a family man breaking a law, crossing a border from Syria to get out, but he won't be the kind of person we're talking about. The kind of people who go into crime as near on a career, they might say that when trying to justify themselves that, look, my parents never had any money, or they were alcoholics, or my uncle used to beat me, or I wasn't very good at school and this was the only thing I could do. It doesn't really add up on the numbers. You still get the same spread of people making mischief for a living than otherwise. I think it's probably some comfort to people to say that I had an impoverished childhood, or where I was in a minority. They didn't like Pakistanis where I was, or they didn't like, say. Now I can see that being some sort of impetus, really. I would think if I was born in, I don't know, Alabama or something in the 60s, I could imagine going into and I was black, I'd imagine going to my parents at about the age when you can understand anything at 9 or 10 and saying, you guys sure you had the right idea having me? I mean, seriously, what are my career options here? I don't know, join the Marines and get probably killed, and that way I'll get a bit of respect, or become a pimp. I mean, thanks very much, you know. I'll get excluded from half the schools that are any good, or I'll go to some kind of pretend equivalent one. I think whoever decides that their circumstances have put them behind the getting opportunities that other people seem to get easily, they will find that the world they've jumped out of is going to be just as challenging as the prejudices that they've left behind. When I was in, and I'm not just speaking from looking at it from outside, when I was arrested in Thailand, like most of the others arrested on drug cases, you get put in chains at first and shuffling around. Okay, they don't treat you as badly as the Thais get treated, because they're under some illusion that the embassies give a shit, which they don't. Or there's some organization that might interfere. But you start to pick up the local language, and I heard early on two Thais looking over, and one educating the other one, saying, "Oh, no, there's Farang, the foreigners, the white people. They're just white trash. That's all they are. I mean, they don't. The word doesn't translate exactly, but that's kind of what it is." So, now this is being considered white trash for a few months until I manipulated my way into a position of respect within the prison. That is nothing comparable to being born with the crushing weight of some a whole society making life difficult for you. But it doesn't. It just gave me the idea that, well, so what? Whatever it is, I'm going to have to. I would have wanted, even if I was born into the elite of the Thai society, I'd still want to make my mark in the world, and I'd still want to be something. So, I was from a generation that was very kind of open-minded anyway. Back in the 60s and 70s, we thought the younger people would have a revolution and change the world. That's how naive we were. We thought
I think every generation goes through that. We're currently going through that at the moment as well, with everyone that kind of reads the work of Marx and assume that they can go out there and change the world on their own and as a collective sometimes. So it's quite interesting.
Don't you think, though, that say you get a wave of sentiment flows through society over something? I remember when Princess Diana was killed, there was a really disproportionate flow of sentiment. I guess you were pretty young when that happened.
Yeah.
But the whole of London nearly closed down.
Yeah.
And was all teary-eyed. I kind of felt that it matched. Every so often, a society feels like having not exactly a party, but a release of emotions. Even if there's nothing to have a release of emotions about, and they'll soak up a cause, even if it's again a bit weak and doesn't stand much scrutiny. We were protesting against the Vietnam War because we like protests. When the police would pick us up and give us a couple of slaps and then drag us back, say, "We see you back at that protest, you'll be in real trouble." We're straight back in there.
Yeah.
This was really just like fun. And I think in the last few years we've seen things where people have gone out on the streets and felt like they were part of something. And yet some of the causes to me seem relatively weak compared to some of the injustices of a few generations ago. When the old former Soviet Union used to crush dissent and East German Stasi police, or we can go to the real extreme and look at for a while Cambodia was called Kampuchea, run by a guy called Pol Pot. If you had spectacles, you got executed because you were considered part of the intelligentsia. And Phnom Penh was evacuated. He made it year zero, Pol Pot. The calendar didn't count anymore. Money was abolished. This guy was extreme. And yet, nobody really objected to it. It didn't affect us. So, these causes are, I think I'm old and cynical, but I think they're more or less just a way of people feeling like they're part of something.
Yeah.
I think, what if we had, the Extinction Rebellion was one. That was, or is, slightly, the cause is not so much discredited, though anything with Greta Thunberg sitting up there and squealing at us like a spoiled brat.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
You stole my childhood, you bastards.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the interesting thing is when you look at her parents and the driving factor behind everything she's doing, you kind of realize where it all comes from. And then having like a whole bunch of like adults and grown-ups and supposedly intelligent people seeing her as the savior of the planet with her methods is very interesting, because I was actually around East London when there was a massive protest and they blocked off the train station and people trying to get to work, and they're preventing normal day-to-day people from getting into work to feed in their families. And it's almost counterproductive because you're trying to get people on your side, but everything you're doing is infuriating the same people that you're trying to send the message to. So, but nonetheless, those people are doing it, they feel like they're doing it for a greater purpose and a greater good, and at the same time it's having this weird counterproductive like effect on society, and it's very strange. There's a lot of strange stuff happening right now.
Do you think that they're really, to me, they're enjoying their moment and they feel like they've got a cause? I presume they feel some illusory sense of passion about it within themselves. I hope they're not entirely, just opportunistic and using it as an excuse to make trouble around town and, for the kind of rave party element of it. But let's just say, and give everybody the benefit of the doubt that they passionately believe something or other about it. The as you said, the justification is whatever inconvenience that's thrown onto people. How can they? They surely would know that a lot of the protests where there is not a singular thing. For example, if we have a cause like Reuben Carter, and Bob Dylan had a protest song about him, being locked up for a murder he probably didn't commit, almost certainly didn't commit. He still spent over 20 years in prison, but he was finally free. That is to me, that you've got a clear object in mind, and it's worth going to taking a direct line to that one. But where you are asking people to do something that's not within their power to do, if really governments are taking more of an interest in carbon emissions perhaps than they ever did, and that is a little to do with public sentiment, but as much to do with economics and technology anyway. You can imagine when nuclear fusion finally brings about cheap electric power, all the carbon issue will be reduced to cows' farts. Because those cows farting to produce all that meat is quite a heavy emitter. And when there's no more combustion engine cars around to do that kind of polluting, I really don't know what the protesters. To listen to them, they say we want governments to commit to such and such or other. Well, the government isn't much. They're just a bunch of people living in hope.
That's the way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and on a personal level, they're just they will be whatever is perceived as electable. And that is their only function. If you're a politician, what do you have to do to be a politician? You have to get elected. And once you get elected, what do you have to do? You have to get on top of everybody else who's also elected. I really think those are their only two functions that they have in mind. And having looked at people as when I had a lot of couriers, they were more than couriers to me. They were almost like a little family I had to take care of. I had to come to understand their thinking very well, as best I could anyway. Also understand the thinking of their little wall of death, the crossing of the customs line. So the thinking of the opposition in that way. And as you get more and more experience of that, I'm thinking if you're a kind of relaxed sort of person, you become very forgiving about human frailty, because often there's not, whatever troubles you have, you've dug the hole and thrown yourself in it. Somebody said to me when there was a guy in the Bangkok prison who conned me out of quite a bit of money, and which I didn't really like, some of my friends who contributed a lot of money to an escape fund that he just spent. And people later on said to me, didn't they throw that guy off a cliff afterwards? And I thought, well, if it had actually done anything apart from fleece everybody, I'd take it more seriously. But the point is, it wasn't so much of the betrayal in the normal sense. I knew when I met him that this guy was probably a bullshitter. But I was so far down at that stage, I just wanted to press that button that says you never existed.
How much did he finesse you for?
About 75,000 or something. But there was about 50,000 from my Thai friends outside who were trying to get me out. But as I even traced him down, not to bring him any misfortune, but just to tell him Dean, I kind of knew you wouldn't do anything. He had made a couple of fumbling sort of attempts to raise some more capital because he'd spent too much of what he'd got from me. But who knows where that would have gone. But what he'd given me was, it might have been an illusory hope, but it was hope enough to keep me alive at a stage when I didn't want to be.
Yeah.
Alive long enough so that nature's own kind of mental repair kicks in and brings you back out of the depths. It was probably only when a policeman came in and said to me, oh, well, look, we don't think you'll actually be executed in the very end, but you'll be 5 years on death row, which is, you're in these really heavy elephant chains in death row. They weld them on too because they're never coming off.
Wow. So you're on a 24/7?
Yeah. And you need to, I saw a guy there with those things on. I saw the welds on them. I thought, how do they do that? Well, they put a kind of bit of animal hide underneath and weld away. And I didn't want to ask him how they came off. Apparently, when you get executed, they have sitting over in the room where the execution takes place, a big machete. And one of the trustees comes in and chops your ankles off. And that way they get the chains back. Because the chains are quite worth something.
Yeah.
But at that stage, and things were so bleak that it was worth 75,000 to a flim-flam artist to give me some reason to keep going. It just seemed to me that the odds of being ever succeeding at anything were so light. But here's another thing. We were talking before about, succeeding at something difficult and looking back on it. Even when I got out of that prison in Bangkok, sure, I was really relieved that I hadn't been caught because that was going to be grim. All the ones who'd been caught before, and there'd only been a half dozen over many, many years. They'd been.
You're the first to ever successfully escape, right?
As far as I know. Well, two ties got to the top of the wall, and because it's got electricity running around it, they got a tingle and fell over into kind of monastery, and the monks brought them a cup of water and then called the jail straight away. And I was going to go with this big Swedish guy, Sten, but he kind of backed out of it. And I really needed him because he was very strong and very big. Some of the things were just exhausting to do on this escape. But a couple of Israelis had turned up a few weeks before D-Day, from when I was meant to go. And they'd escaped from a little lockup up north in Chiang Mai. And they went to the guest house where they were staying and they knew somebody. He bled them dry of their little bit of money. I think they were at about 12,000. They had no after-escape plan. The most important part of escape is what to do afterwards, where to go. They didn't have backup documents or friends to supply them. So they were eventually caught and they were dragged down to a kind of dungeon in Chiang Mai, and they broke their legs with iron bars and put rocks on top of them. Well, they would have been dead, except they'd been pretty toughened, these two guys. They'd been in the Israeli Defense Force, and they one helped the other one, brought him dragged in agony out from the rocks and gave him some water. So their guards were pretty surprised to see them still alive after 10 days. But when they arrived back in Bangkok, they wouldn't put up with them there. They were sent to the high security prison. They were in these heavy chains, but their legs looked like... Imagine some angry kid at McDonald's grabs a fistful of drinking straws and crushes them in his hand and throws them. They were all twisted sideways. And I'm trying, just before my Swedish friend sees these guys, I'm trying to make light of it. Stan, you wouldn't believe it. I was just around the corner there. A couple of saps came from up north. Oh, did they make a mess of things? Of course, the Thais treated them pretty badly. Anyway, Stan looked at me like, what the fuck? And he took a look at these guys and thought, oh, I don't want to end up like that. So...
is he still serving life there? What happened to Stan?
I mean, he probably regretted not coming in the end because he did 12 years altogether, got transferred back to Sweden, and they made him do a few more there. He's all right, but this was his explanation. I mean, I've been at him to give me some photos to get his passport done, and that did seem a very iffy thing. Would these passports be any good once we got out? But he would never even give me the photos. So he said, look, I've got nowhere to go. I can't, nobody I can call upon. And that was another big advantage. I had friends. I had friends for years, and good ones at that. I mean, the kind of friends you can, well, here's an example. Michael, he knew I'd been in trouble in Asia, Thailand somewhere, didn't know what exactly word was getting. And I hadn't spoken to him for months and months and months. And I finally got the use of somebody's cell phone behind some rice stacks in the coffee shop, general store they have there. And I got through to Michael. I said, look, finally I got through. Michael, let me tell you what's going on here. And he said, David, look, we could get cut off at any moment. Don't explain anything. Just tell me where I've got to go, what I've got to do, and how much I'll need to get. Now, that's the kind of thing you want to hear out of somebody, isn't it? You know, the kind of person you can ring at 3 o'clock in the morning and, you know, they got the phone under the neck as they're stuffing guns and money in a bag. You know? But the most of the people in that prison, they'd blown around on the wind of sucker-level crime where they were the couriers or on the wrong end of the deal or international junkies. I mean, the jail had everything. There were beggars inside that prison who'd come to Thailand to beg because they were European beggars, Italians and whatnot, and they all had a sort of hobo network way of looking at things.
Would you say you were the only kingpin in there at the time in terms of like international traffic?
I expected the place to have its own, like what I'd always imagined from South American prisons. You know, some big shot, you know. And kind of enthusiastically, I said, well, take me to who's the richest here? The foreigners? No. Foreigners were shit. There's some Mr. Big, and it took me over to some guys resting in a hammock there. And he was a sea captain or something. And, you know, ton of dope in it. But he'd been abandoned. The Thai outlook on life is luck and no luck. And we in the West, you and I, the reason we've got money and you're sitting there on a comfortable sofa and you've got stuff around is not because your parents worked hard or you worked hard or you've got talent. You're lucky. That's it.
Yeah. Is that like their spiritual belief in everything in the order of the world is either you're left or right? Luck or no luck.
It's and it goes to the heart of so many things that their outlook on education. Corrected told a little kid once there while I was living in Thailand to do. If you wanted to do your addition, you put the numbers underneath each other and you can follow it down the line. And she was all happy about that and then was crying the next day after school. The teacher told her, no, we don't do it that way till next year. Your answer might have been the same as if you get it the other way, but you were 100% wrong. You're not allowed to do it now. And now, whereas a teacher in England would say, oh, that's good of you. You're ahead of everybody. You know? But there, it wasn't taken that way. So anybody in jail is unlucky. And if they're still in jail after weeks and months, then they're going to be unlucky for quite some time. In a courtroom, it's a wonder to behold. The anything is acceptable as evidence. The defense case is referred to in Thai as the dream. The judge, there's no juries, a judge reads the evidence into a dictaphone as he sees it, and everybody signs it at the end. I had a couple of, there was some evidence against me which amounted to this. Two Australian policemen having a conversation about what I would have become if I'd been allowed to succeed on this imaginary operation that took place over there. And how villainous and organised and bad I was. This story, which was mentioned in the local paper, was introduced as evidence of my guilt in the court. And it was shoehorned in there by, I think they got somebody, she was an English translator at the local university. And the judge reading the evidence back into the records clearly shows that the accused is famously criminal from many parts of the world, including country, lived many years. And this was verified by Miss whatever from Chulalongkorn University, who's got a degree in something, as though that somehow makes the evidence true.
Yeah.
And I look kind of wistfully at my lawyer, and he just said, well, yes, he's wrong, but we can argue that in an appeal court somewhere. It was clearly not going to. A friend of mine, John Russell, was convicted on and got 50 years in a case where the evidence was a blurry photograph of 5 people at a cafe. He was said to be the translator for a drug gang. And that was a conviction. It kind of
was like, that Thailand as well?
Yeah. If you're brought there, somebody must want you in there, and unless somebody tells me different, you'll be convicted. It wasn't. I always knew that wasn't going to go well. I was just trying to get enough time to.
With the knowledge of that, that's why you needed to make your escape, because you just knew that you're going to get sentenced. You're going to go down for life for this.
Yeah. Oh, I would have, and where I was going, I would have had to start again. The jail was worse and better. Worse in some ways, that it was really only for lifers or on death row, but it was the time involved. I would have been on death row for 5 years or so, and escape from there would have been very, very difficult. And I just I didn't know whether I'd be in good enough shape, by then, having chains for so long. And iron bars take a bit of cutting. Even on the night
how was the escape executed? Because that would have been quite difficult, escaping out of prison on your own as well, without the help of your mate.
It turned out that him not being there, or anybody being there, was an advantage, because, for example, the 7 who had tried to escape, there were 5 Thais and a Singaporean and somebody else. They'd spent a lot of time arguing between each other about things they'd promised that weren't true, and alternatives which they didn't realize they'd have to make, and choices. At least by myself, sink or swim, I could make the decision readily enough. And I'd spent a lot of time pacing out the place, imagining during the day, okay, I've got to this point, what do I do next? And I get to that point. But I really didn't understand the layout of the prison terribly well. And it was before the era of Google Maps and Google Earth. And nobody could just get me a picture of the place. And friends had tried to pace it out, but there was a moat surround 12,000 inmates in this prison, in 10 subdivision prisons within prisons. A moat around the outside. I think the outside wall was at least 15, 16 meters high, with electrical wire strung around it as well. So, and another moat on the inside. But having said all that, the big advantage was that it had never happened, so they're not really tuned into the idea of it happening. Also, I elevated my position there by renting my own room, you could say. I mean, most of the rooms were just small cells with 14 people sleeping literally like sardines, because one person had to have his head one way and feet the other and so on. But if you contributed generously to the local building restoration fund, I used to exercise and had to run past the building chief's office and, "Oh, David, I can't stop." Because if I sat down for 5 minutes, the chief had
They were
buried
funded by
his head in
your
his
foundation.
hand. And the trustees were all evil narcs over there. They'd rat you out in a minute. Okay, the 20-odd plans I had about being lifted from the court and welded into the back of the VW van that was being repaired in the prison's auto shop, and then when that was collected, I'd be taken. They all came to nothing because I realized that I would be ratted out if there were ties involved. But even if there was Europeans or anybody else involved, there'd be chatter about it. They didn't have much to do with their time, and keeping secrets is not something they're likely to do, and they'd probably drop out. So just through attrition of every other idea, the direct route was the only one, and that would involve cutting my way out of the 3rd floor story cell, finding a way to get over. There was an awning with a whole lot of broken masonry. I had to somehow get over that because I couldn't touch it or drop down onto it. It would crumble and alert everybody. Then make my way across several walls, ladders, all of that. It turned out to be, on the one hand, the thing that I quite liked the idea of. I mean, I was getting comfortable enough by then. I had a staff of about 10. That sounds like, well, the guy must have had money, but not really. I'm talking about maybe £500 a month to maintain this little family here. Sometimes we take on people. Just my head butler would bring me people that he just liked and wanted to help. And there was one guy he found who didn't know what country he'd come from. Spoke every language we could throw at him with an accent. You know, we've got to go try Persian. Yeah, he understands it, but he speaks.
How did he look like? What was his features?
He looked like kind of. Gee, it's hard to describe.
Yeah.
What Iranian people look like a bit?
Yeah.
Generally kind of hairy and dark.
Yeah.
This one was stocky, but that didn't give us any real clues. It was very hard to identify. He'd grown up with. He'd lost his family when he was little, and there was an Iranian connection, but he didn't speak that language well. He spoke some Arabic, but his uncle had taken him to Dubai and Qatar and some of the Gulf states, and he spoke mostly to Filipina nannies and maids and whatnot who were prisoners of their own kind, and then came to Thailand and sort of scraped up bits of languages off the street there. So it was just astonishing. I was looking at Sten, the Swedish guy. I said, how is it we're in a world where somebody can be drifting around? Right? The guy's been to about 7 countries, doesn't know anything properly, has no view of the world, not any proper education or anything. It was just so unwanted. He ended up in Thailand, and it was still never clear how he got there, and then scooped up by the police on one of their random sweeps and never got out. Nobody took an interest. So, I don't know, we gave him a job. What was it? Chimney sweep or something. Didn't have any chimneys. It was a good thing to have a chimney. I've got a chimney sweep. What have you got?
At least he had a title.
Yeah. And sometimes a refuge. my Chinese friends there. It's always good to have Chinese friends. Cultivate those where you can.
Yeah.
You never know. They have the most intensely secretive networks, and usually somebody somewhere who can do something. They got me my passport for there too.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
But they brought me this little boy that had come in somewhere, and he had a black eye, but he was so pretty. I mean, he looked like some little geisha girl,
Yeah.
about 12 or something. I mean, no place to be in jail.
Yeah.
We know how he got the black eye.
Yeah.
And my Chinese friend said, "Oh, look, if you just take care of him for a couple of days, we'll sort out something for him." Yeah, okay. And my head butler, Jet, it was only about 4.5 feet tall. A complete midget, but loved bossing everybody around, and a good organizer. He got the ice collected and went down and made sure the shopping was done and everything prepared. Quite a good go-between with some of the officers that were difficult. It's always good to have somebody in the middle if you're caught in a bad place, because whatever goes wrong, you blame the guy in the middle. And then when you make a deal, it's like, oh, well, Francis, if I'd known it had been you sent that imbecile to see me. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. We put the little kid in the room, but even Jet, a couple of times I had to go, "Jet, would you leave that little boy alone?" "Oh, but he's so cute." "He might be cute, but that's why he gets in trouble.
Yeah.
Last thing he needs is you molesting him here." "Oh, I'm not doing anything, I'm just touching him." "Yeah, well, that's..." I mean, the Thai attitude to sex is pretty relaxed anyway. Other things had come up, but I kind of kept away from the other foreigners mostly. I reluctantly took a few into my room. There was Kevin from Hawaii, and we had a musician friend, and it comes to mind because this goes to a point we were talking about on outlook and where people see themselves in the world, or whether all of that. He was a very good guitarist, but he was born to what would I say, an unidentifiable mix of Asian cultures, but spoke languages very, very well. Flawless English that he picked up somewhere, good Thai, Malaysian, and a couple of others. And his grasp of language was so good, he could tell me this. He said, "David, when I'm speaking another language, I can think in it. I can sometimes dream in these other languages." That's great. Yeah, but that's not the point. I'm a different person in each language. I have a different view of the world in each language.
So it inhabits the full culture of...
Yeah. It's as though, and I've seen too, people under extremes where their languages kind of separate from themselves. It almost suggests that the part of our minds that do the talking is one section. The part that does the listening and interpreting is another section. But both of them are add-ons. They're a bit of patch software or something you can get in our little heart of hearts, where nothing much to do with what we interpret, how we're really listening to things is done by a very hard-edged master inside that will pick out things that other people are saying. And the Department of Talking does another job, and that is, if you direct it to, it can pass on information, but left to its own devices, it will be an entirely defensive network.
Yeah.
You can imagine at an evolutionary level, what is the big advantage to being able to communicate in words? To teach your children? Yes, but monkeys teach their children, birds teach their children. I've seen little kids playing together. They didn't know any kind of language. They seem to get along okay. Mostly they can do that. But probably, I'm guessing, maybe your evolutionary biologist could clear this up. I expect that the ability to talk was the advantage of lying. And the reason that is, you can say in the campfire, well, because you're talking to the alpha male. Yeah. Oh, no, I tell you what, the good food is over that hill. Oh, look, go down to that. That is the look. It wasn't for my bad leg,
Yeah.
I'd be right over there. Now over there, he gets eaten by a lion, and so he's out of the way. And this gives a breeding advantage too, because you're deflecting the alphas and the competition and having it off with their girlfriends and wives. So it's your genes that are going on. Always the deceptive part of it being promoted and raised in the rank. Now, the ultimate in deceptive language is not appearing deceptive at all. The more genuine a person sounds, that is ideally what you want, because you don't have to, that if you talk to somebody who you feel like you're being conned in some way, they're really low down on the ranks of things, because they've got the, but it does kind of make you wonder whether the organization of our minds is along any of the lines we really think they are. And so many things that views, like this guy, the musician, he said, I'll take a stricter view if I'm thinking in Malay about various things, but I'll be more relaxed in Thai. A lot of expressed beliefs are really only a matter of fitting into the circumstances that we find ourselves in, not necessarily a belief. So I found through all these years of working with different people in different places, pretty much to ignore everything, as though I, like, what was that traveler in ancient Greece who had his crew with wax in their ears so he could listen to the sirens, and he's screaming at them. He's tied to the mast. Was it Achilles? I'm not sure. And no, I don't think it was him. But I really tend to more just watch what people do and look back about, I mean, the friends that have helped me weren't necessarily the rich ones or the people who had something to gain. They've just decided to be your friend. And the people who fell to pieces under interrogation in a police station. Yeah, McMillan's his name. That's MC, not MC. Get that right.
Were they quick to give off?
Yeah. I mean, what was the old joke? It took one slap to get him to talk and 5 slaps to get him to shut up.
That's the start. You don't stop doing that. But in terms of all these people that you came across, you talked about all the various individuals. Were they pushed to the underground all for the same reasons, or what was the commonality in terms of the reason why they were pushed into the underground? Because I know we were discussing previously via emails in regards to like country, poverty, race, and so forth. What was the major underlying issue for majority of the people that you came across in the system?
Okay, we have to strip ourselves down a bit of a bunch of side players, because if we walk into a jail, 20% of them are there because they've got nowhere else to stay. Another 20% or so because they're part of the care and the community nutters that have gone off the rails and been put in. An extraordinary number of them are wife beaters. But amongst the ones, a fairly narrow band, perhaps 15%, who chose to go into a crime for a living, they're largely social reasons that they felt accepted within that group. And I think that generally applies almost everywhere. So much so that some of the jail babies would not be comfortable outside, even in the criminal world particularly, but only inside, and they'd be back within weeks after getting released. And you could see some of the young guys coming back, and his friends would say, "Oh, it was 3 weeks ago you were out." "Yeah, look, I got fitted up by the cops. It was a terrible thing, and I'll tell you all about it." But bouncing down to the wings there, and knowing his way around, I've got a friend who's down at the stores who'll get me kitted out, would organize my cell and get my drug line going and all of that. Back in the days when they used to throw things over the wall, they usually get an end cell with a good view of a flat rooftop where it'd be. There were professional throwers out there. One of the best of whom was a girl with one leg. She used to do it.
Oh wow!
100 pounds a throw, and the parcel would be in bubble wrap, but also covered in little fish hooks.
Yeah.
And she could angle it just about within 2 feet of the bottom of outside the cell. So people would get a mop head and throw it out on a line, and then as long as they touched that parcel, the fish hooks would sit.
Fish hook is it? Yeah.
And get it up. But these guys had come back, and they were at home there. And I think it's the same where people feel excluded by some group or the larger group or whatever due to perhaps poverty or race or even within. I mean, it's so hard to. I spoke about smugglers' tools and identifying people as useful, and taking a very cynical look. Never mind about what's right or wrong. How can you best find what you need to get and who to trust? Is there anything left of race which will tell you anything, or anything left of country that don't trust an Albanian type stories, or but yeah, and haven't we heard that of every single country in the world?
Yeah.
We used to. Who was the butt of jokes in England a century ago? The Irish. They used to copy.
Yeah.
Then somebody else gets it. But I found that there was. Okay, circumstance can. You'll find a greater number of people from a certain part of the world. You'll see them up to certain kinds of mischief. But does that mean they're more crooked? No. And here's the way it works. I think it's a social phenomenon. Sometimes I'd figure out what seemed to be quite a good route where nobody had gone before. There was 2 regional airports in Pakistan, Faisalabad and I think of the other one. I think was it Multan? Could have been. They only had international flights twice a week, so they weren't set up for it. And so relatively speaking, it was easy to come and go there. And time and again, I'd be in the line there, and I'd meet somebody from Nigeria. And I'd follow and I'd say, "You guys, every time I get to the door, I'm the idiot at the end of the queue. Why come you're always onto everything so quickly?"
Yeah.
And some of my friends in there say, "Well, it's kind of where we grew up. So it's a social thing. They're kind of sometimes city people, and I'm not talking about a black-white thing. This is something within Nigeria itself. Is it Igbo?
Igbo, yeah, and Yoruba.
Yeah, there's some group there, which is geographic origin, that people who've got a name for being untrustworthy or devious.
Yeah.
I don't know. I said, "Look, I don't understand. Like what? You know how some people in your country don't trust the Jews? Yeah. It's kind of a bit like that in that way." And I'd come across that before with the Afridi people in Pakistan. Kind of admired for their ability to survive in different sets of circumstances, but also resented for it sometimes at the same time. And the Afridi actually had that name too. Now, I suppose were the Afridis identifiable by the look of them? Maybe. But do you say that to yourself in retrospect? It's quite possible. I mean, they were known as the Jews of the Northwest Frontier Province and up north. But I think they had a more of a slightly Persian look. But I think that's becoming less and less reliable as a guide to what somebody's background is as time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit like finding those beggars in the Thai prison. As time goes on, travel being so easy and cheap, people are ever more mixing, and you won't be able to jump into some place you don't know and look around and identify people you think come from a particular place. But what we'll always be able to do, I guess, with experience, is look at the way people move around a room and interact with other people. I think those behaviorists are always saying with some truth that they don't have to listen to a conversation in a room. They can work out by body language.
Yeah, most definitely. You can sort of suss out like even dominance hierarchies through body language and movements in a room. Yeah.
And now, a short pause of a couple of minutes for some blatant self-promotion. 10. In a walled garden on yet another sunny day, I was drinking lime juice with a little gin, talking to Captain Arshad and a Christian tax collector when my servant announced that an Englishman lived nearby, held in the comfortable but parasitic grip of notorious Akbar Shah, the Amsterdam-based hashish smuggler and gambling addict. Akbar Shah was no longer in Europe, but was with the only other Englishman held in Karachi's Landi jail, as was I. You see, I was in the jail, but obviously a very civilized section of it. And how did I make it so from the dungeons where I'd been taken? Well, hello. I don't have to tell you there's some good books around. I have many. Some are on my nightstand, over on my desk, bouncing around the back of my car, or left on trains, all places where they never get read, because I simply don't have time. Do you? Hello, David McMillan here, and thoughtfully, some people, including myself, have recorded their books on audio. Where else? And they are available through Audible, which is part of Amazon. There's nowhere else to go. It's a kind of audiobook mafia. But that aside, available they are.
Definitely. You can sort of suss out like even dominance hierarchies through body language and movements in a room. Yeah.
And I've seen things where the people, and we can do it ourselves, we don't need somebody to tell us. You can look at a party where a whole lot of people have been brought in on some vaguely common cause, like a business meeting or a conference or something. And you'll see from the way that interaction, who will end up doing most of the talking will be the influencer of the place, or that kind of thing. And that really will be more and more a thing that people will have to take in if they want any guide to understanding their way around people, rather than the look. Been losing it for centuries, really, millennia, but I expect I mean, people tend to, don't they? Like I was saying, people went into crime because they got accepted into that criminal world more readily than somewhere else. Oddly enough, some young person might go into the criminal world, and you've probably seen it yourself, and be absolutely deceived by the bosses down there. Oh, welcome. Yeah, what, you had a hard time from school? Yeah, teaching. I said, oh, what, your parents don't understand. Yeah, I understand. Your friends are. And what they'll really be doing is saying, how can we use this little one as
Yeah.
he come in? We'll give him all the shit jobs. And
Yeah.
then,
And he probably goes in there with no plan as well, so he just accepts whatever it is that's handed to him.
yeah, yeah. And if he survives and grows up and looks back, he'll sort of realize that he was being, manipulated and used that way. But within just about almost all of the people, except for a few who were kind of looking for trouble, and I think I was in a way. I always thought that I was a bit impatient and in a hurry, and really wanted to kind of play with my toys and have all the stuff that I wanted. I'm never interested in really showing off or anything, but just do interesting things. And I think I even went into a big library once and looked up in the Guinness Book of Records what was the most profitable business in the world.
And what was it?
Narcotics. It said, I
Pharmaceuticals
remember
is
the
always the
line.
number one.
I was 14 years old and it was like a religious moment. It said the difference between the wholesale price of opium on the poppy fields compared with the street price. Dime bags in New York City is 8 million%.
Because you were a millionaire by what, 21, was it?
Yeah. It was
How long
just
before the drug
a
came
very good market ratio at the time. 1 kilo would return $500,000.
How long was you in the game at that time?
About 3 years before a big arrest, and then the business kind of changed over years. But I had, I think, 18 months, which was pretty much a golden period of no mishaps and continuous building. But like all, but the trouble with that world is anything that's identifiable will be confiscated when the downfall comes, and also you will, whatever you've got doesn't seem to matter. And I've checked with other friends. You're willing to spend a third of everything you have to get out of trouble when you're in trouble. And that doesn't, depending on the strength of your enemy, that doesn't really help. So then once you're in prison, you're willing to spend another third trying to get rid of it or get out or whatever. Many times when I was young, I was giving money to people that I thought only maybe, because I could never see the logic in them just running away with the stake money. They were supposed to pick me up in a van during a prison transfer or something like that. Because I like to find solutions myself. I always thought it'd be more interesting to do what you say you're going to do, get the person out of the jail and then reap the reward. I thought that's got to work better because it's a long-term thing. From this person you're always going to be reliable and trusted and all of that kind of stuff. But people are very short-term minded. I think that's why I end up being so dismissive about what people say, and I look to kind of little things about their manner. Often people in prisons especially will say, oh, I live like shit here, but you should have seen me on the outside. I had on a jam, I had a gold toothbrush, a titanium sports car or whatever. But it's not the case. It's that if they live like shit inside, they live like shit outside.
Outside, yeah.
And that is quite a challenge to take on. Many people find it very hard to distinguish good from bad in people. You know, when you're outside, we've got so many clues to somebody, haven't we?
Yeah.
Even if it's just somebody on the other end of a phone, or talk to somebody at a bus stop, or at some business meeting. I think, we're always looking for little clues. We're looking them up and down. How scuffed are their shoes? How irrelevant is that? But we tend to take it all in. I suppose the more superficial of us, or younger perhaps, will look at the surface things like shoes and wristwatch and trappings. Whereas when you get more experienced, you're kind of sitting back now. Well, I can't really judge anything at this moment. I'll have to see this person doing things, and I think that ability to withhold judgment is a very good thing to have, and it's very hard to impart upon somebody else, because it's, in a way, it's an unnatural thing. We don't want to be sitting back and making reserved judgments when a snake comes across the ground and bares its fangs at you. Yeah. No, there's 3 spots on the back of the head.
Trying to figure out what snake is.
Venomous, and I'm dead.
Yeah.
It is
a privilege. Yeah.
The survivors in our past have all been, for the most, making quick judgments. Good ones, maybe lucky ones, but quick. So it takes a bit of shaking off to. I don't know. I find there's people within my family and friends who get actually annoyed if I say, well, I can't tell yet. I don't have enough information. I don't know what he or she might do. The usual things I expect, unless I know different. So that they'll go to make those quick judgments, and in prisons, sometimes in some of them, the first timers would be pounced upon in various ways.
Yeah.
At a prison I was in once, I had some Lebanese friends, and some of them are living by fleecing out the middle income, higher income people that had come in with problems. Because you had to share a cell in the beginning, I'd be looking for somebody who was completely pliable. And I'd be standing with my Lebanese friend watching the prison van come in, and we'd be looking at the slaves coming off the market. And the screws would be looking at us thinking, oh yeah, what are these guys up to? And I'd find what I wanted by some kid, looking a bit lost down at his feet, sitting on his duffel bag. And I'd say, look, tell you what, kid, if you come and stay in my place, there's 4 of us there, you'll be the 4th. This is how it goes. We work in the kitchen. We eat better than anybody around here. On the weekends, you'll be given some drugs, and you'll go to sleep or amuse yourself quietly on your little bunk over in the corner. But the rules are that you have no friends. We don't want to know about them, and they're certainly not coming into our little place. But as I say, you'll live better than anybody else, and nobody will annoy you. The smart ones or the lost ones said, take that, and it would be ideal. It's like that person didn't exist in the room. You just had to feed him. Okay, sometimes you get problems with certain kinds of drugs. They get kind of too happy and want to, for some reason, go up to the prison officers and want to make friends with them while stoned off their nut. I like you. People say you're all cunts, but I think you're all right. So you have to go and grab them and say, don't mind him, he just doesn't. Yeah. Whereas a couple of these Lebanese guys, they were very good, and it was quite a good thing to go and watch if you were heartless enough to enjoy this kind of entertainment. there was one guy who came in, I think he only had 18 months or something, but to him this was crushing. He'd never been away from his family so long. It was a complicated sort of fraud case. He said it wasn't his fault, it was the accountant's. And this was all wonderful stuff to the guys because they were soaking up the information. Accountant, business, what? And the exchange of the photographs around the cell. Is that your wife? Oh, well, she's home now. Yeah, fine. Kids looking good. Yeah. And Alex used to say, your wife, a gorgeous looking woman, if I may say so. George, did I tell you about my wife? Talking to one of his friends. That slut, I was in here for 2 weeks and she was fucking everything inside. Your wife, of course. Yeah, no, so look at her. Oh, she turned out. Virgin Mary. Now this, and she even came and sat in front of me, kissing me with those lips that had been around the dick of some scumbag. And he turned out to be my friend as well. Did I tell you that? Not your wife, of course. No, she looks like a saint. She'd never. So it would be cranked up, so that this guy would be fretting really terribly about being away from home and the wife. That was step one. And it went on so that then there would be trashing the guy's lawyer. That was step two. Knowingly mocking everything that happened in court and how he was misled, used, taken advantage of, everything. They'd even pick somebody who was being transferred to another prison or otherwise being released perhaps, and stage a little thing that within a week. The guy would have a box. Oh, just bring around some stuff you might need, guys. Thanks for all the help with the case and everything. Oh, just glad it worked out. There's nothing to do with us. Yeah. What did that appeal lawyer did? Oh, yeah. Went in there and wiped the floor with them in the higher courts. Anyway, I'm off. Thanks. That's it. What was that? Oh, nothing. We don't talk about other people's cases here. He's heard everything anyway, hasn't
he? How much of your life did you spend in jail overall, though? Like, how many years?
I think I've added it up to about 23 and a half.
Okay.
And that was, as I say, only about half of that was actual sentencing time. Some of it, unfortunately, most of it in very bad conditions. Even in the Australian case, I was in Supermax there for, my wife was, when I was arrested there, because as I mentioned, there was no drugs, so a lot of pressure. So they arrested everybody. I mean, my mother was dragged in overnight. And then our wives were held without bail, conspiracy, and big importation thing. And I was even talking with Michael, look, we might have to, it sounds bad, I know, we never do this normally, but we might have to plead to it. We don't rat anybody out, just to get, the deal is the wives go. Yeah, I suppose. But what's that? Well, we escape, that's what we do. At least they're out there, they can sort our stuff out and get our money. But before that happened, the police had put an informer in their cell to try and soak up a bit of information to use in the court case later. But made a bad choice of informer. This girl was an arsonist, principally, and she'd been a inmate of little homes and nut houses and things over the years. Set fire to the dormitory cell that they were in, and it killed 3 women, and including our wives, and we found that out the hard way, running upstairs in the morning to the prison guards and saying, the fire at the women's prison, 3 dead we hear. Names?
Yeah.
And this is something you don't want to get. Well, Francis, we haven't. You got the list? No, I haven't got the list. No, there's a bit of trouble. We don't know yet, David. We'll let you know. And I was very bitter after that.
I can imagine.
I wasn't interested in the case. I sent messages to friends saying, listen, I'm going to tell the police I want to talk to them next week. They'll take me across the road to the police station. Drive past, throw me a couple of guns. That's all I ask. Nothing else. I'll do the rest. And so I was in a Supermax because of that. The police let it be known that we were having the witnesses bumped off, and to prove we were serious, we bumped off our own wives just to get started. A story as ridiculous as it is was accepted actually by my father-in-law, so that kind of broke off that.
Can you imagine? So he thought that you were behind that. He believed in the stories that were being pushed out.
At first, when it happened, he went out of his way to send a message saying, "Listen, I don't blame you for anything." He wasn't talking about having her killed, but the lifestyle and everything. I don't blame you, and I'm here to support you. But then that all dropped when this rumor started getting around. He meant, I presume he thought this is not likely, but wow, how did a story like that get started?
Yeah.
So I was in the Supermax, which was a concrete zoo, big, thick 2-inch glass doors, operated electronically, no outside air, cameras everywhere. You couldn't take a shower without a camera on you. Had to make an application for toilet paper and all of that. Got out of that within a year, then accused of helicopter escape 2 weeks before the trial started. Thrown back into Supermax for that. And then, they kept that place running. It only held 48. But in a place that held 48, there were at least 30 deaths a year. So more than half the population was dead. You had a very good chance of being dead. They closed
was that through violence or suicide? What was causing that?
People killing each other. It was full of, quite some psychos, as you can imagine. And amongst the multiple murderers, they don't like somebody who's, it's like an argument between two stick insects, There was a multiple killer. He liked to keep his numbers up to be the most.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And there was a dispute between a couple of guys, and they'd given people something to do in there. They used to make soft toys, and they had contact adhesive, amongst other things. And they'd been having a little argument. They were both lifers. And one poured contact adhesive all over the other one. Had a bunch of matches all tied together, threw it on top of him. This went up in flames. When the screws eventually got through all those double electronic doors to try and put him out with a fire blanket, Alex was there with his guitar, waving it around at the screws, and let him burn, let him burn.
Wow.
When I saw Barry, he was black completely over with an incrustation of seared prison uniform. We were in a kind of jumpsuit that went up the top. In fact, they put a little padlock on there when you're on a visit, so you couldn't unzip it. There was nothing left of him, but his testicles were swollen up like apples.
Yeah.
And you know what he said to me? How's this for stupid last words? Dave, don't let that bastard wreck my stereo. I've left it in the day room.
That was his final words.
Yeah, Barry, I'll see that doesn't happen. Yeah, don't worry. And people you wouldn't expect to be particularly violent, but were kind of methodically. I spoke to a guy called Ted Eastwood, who was he'd kidnapped a couple of busloads of children, not once but twice. He'd escaped from jail and then kidnapped another load. They kept ordering all these McDonald's meals, and that brought him undone going back to get the second lot. Anyway, I saw Ted in the exercise yard, which was all concrete with a cage over the top to stop the helicopters. We had a little conversation. How are you, Ted? Fine. He's wiping up his hands, and he's got a craft knife that was used in one of the making soft toys hobbies. And he's just cut to pieces some other guy there. And in front of me, he's cutting his hands a little bit. I said, watch it, Ted. You'll hit a main cable there if you're not careful. No, it's all right. I know what I'm doing. I'll need this because the other guy attacked me, didn't he, with his knife? Oh, of course. Anyway, I'll catch you after you get back from the hospital. So he was acquitted of that in court. They charged him with murder again, of course.
Wow.
So he was, he wasn't trying to build up his numbers. The ones who were trying to get murder notches under their belt. But this was the kind of place, and oddly enough, as to be expected, not oddly enough, any place that was halfway all right, I'd only be there briefly, and then go on. So, but it's too many years. If I could have, everybody would make some change if they could be their 20-year-old self again.
Yeah.
I think I would have much preferred to be a researcher or
But I mean, judging by your personality type, it seems like you always wanted to do something that sort of like involved a high level of risk. So where would that risk come from, being a researcher, or was that just the hope?
I suppose not. No, I mean, I always liked the idea of controlled risk. For example, if you were offered a place on one of the early Apollo missions, would you take it?
Knowing me, I would, yeah, because I like the unknown, and I'm a bit of a risk taker, so I would probably take it. Yeah, but then
know that. Remember when we used to see them? Well, at my age, I did. The moon lander was a concoction of two things, a little round thing on the landing device.
Yeah.
And when they had to go back, they'd press a button and ignite the one rocket engine with the one load of fuel to get off the moon and back and rendezvous with the orbiting return craft. I mean, imagine you're sitting there in a box that parts of which are no thicker than a aluminium tin can, and you press ignite and nothing happens.
Yeah, you're screwed.
Try that again, Francis, and once more with feeling.
yeah, you're screwed.
In fact, a little speech had been written in case that exact thing did happen for Nixon to read out. It was written by William Safire, who was a columnist, and it says something along the lines of, no matter what happened, there will always remain a part of the moon that which is forever mankind, or something. And they were offered cyanide suicide capsules. Or it wasn't even a capsule, it was just something they could scratch themselves with. But they all declined to take those with them.
Yeah.
I think, why do you suppose they declined to take the suicide thing with them? I mean, no fun suffocating in a small
No, I think so, yeah. And it's always the idea that captains like going down with their ship, and they like going down the hard way.
Oh, I see what you mean. Just dedication to it.
Yeah, dedication to the cause and the purpose. It's like, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down.
You don't think
the
there's
hard
some
way
element to it where if I have some easy way out, fuck everything up, or if something bad goes.
That's true.
But if I don't have an easy way out, I've got to really focus on getting a solution. I'd be thinking that way a little bit myself.
Yeah.
My mother, after a couple of misadventures, my mother used to say to me, "Oh, David, do you keep a suicide capsule with you?"
Yeah.
Which I was never sure quite how to take that. Was it like she cared a lot, or it was past caring? I'm not sure.
But throughout your whole ordeal, what did she think about what you were doing, and
She couldn't understand why.
Yeah.
She, at first, with the first major arrest, she and I guess this was my stepfather's view at the time. Everybody was involved in counterculture and drugs, and so it was just one of those things. You're too young to know any different. But when it became clear that something bad had happened, and I'd more or less just brush myself off and go back to it, they really couldn't understand, and why I just didn't do something else. Perhaps just being impatient really. Patience is a very hard thing to learn for somebody who's not terribly patient, or wants to be. I suppose maybe there's a couple of different kinds of people. Those who say, I want to look up on top of the Grand Canyon, but there's a whole lot of steps to climb, so I'll see if I can get myself a helicopter. Or the people say, oh no, part of it, looking over the Grand Canyon, is climbing up all those steps. I think looking for the is it bad to look for the shortcut? Well, it is if it's certainly risky. But I just think I could have done. I mean, I was trained as a cameraman, and I was quite good at that. I could have probably had a reasonably happy and successful career.
Yeah.
Being a photographer. But I don't know, as a teenager, I always felt I didn't have enough control over my own life, and I definitely wanted that. And having enough money to live how I wanted was a very big part of it. I mean, is that greed? Is that not willing to do the work to get the reward? I don't think that's particularly any different from anybody. I think if we could all, it'd be sensible if you could find a way to avoid the work to get the reward. But what restrains most people's hands is a sensible awareness of risk. I think with certainly with crossing borders, you need to make a certain number of mistakes to have impressed upon you the value of learning things that can't be. There isn't a course, there isn't a smuggler's 101 or anything like that. But there comes a point too when it's. I know it sounds stupid to say, well, too late to turn back now. It's never too late, but I found after that first long stretch, that 10 years, in which I'd been in the Supermax twice, I'd lost a wife.
Where was the 10 years again? Sorry, was that was the 10 years in Australia?
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Most of that fairly difficult and tough conditions. I was released, sort of. I was released, but I was under surveillance from the very beginning. Things weren't really important, but I'd spent a fair bit of time making things out of wood in the last place I was at, and carved these ornate things. But they were too heavy to carry back with me when I was released, so I had a courier come and get them. And then when they were delivered, they were dumped outside, all sawn and smashed to pieces. The courier said the police showed him a badge, took them away, and that's it. Said they had authority to do it. My flat was bugged. I was under surveillance, as I say, immediately. And I just thought I have to escape from all of that. Then I headed off towards Europe, but didn't make it that far. I stopped in Bangkok to pick up some money and got tangled up in that case there. Escaped from that. There comes a point there. I've got nothing to retire into exactly. I'm already wanted for having jumped in Thailand.
I was going to ask that. What would happen if you was to return to Thailand right now?
About 3 years ago, the Thais had finally had a success with an extradition for a guy that had killed a U.S. Marine there in Phuket or somewhere. Now, this was unusual because they'd attempted to extradite people for 100 years and never got anywhere. So having had that success, which was, to my mind, entirely based on the fact that the one he'd killed over there was a U.S. Marine, and the Americans are not going to wear that. So at the very least, they wanted him taken back to Thailand to But having had that success, I was out of the blue arrested and held in Wandsworth pending extradition to Thailand, and fought that case for 2 years. If I'd have gone back there, I wouldn't have survived, that's for sure. So, in a way, okay, I finally dealt with that. They can't get me back now. But while in the years after my escape, there wasn't any, laying down of the weapons and getting out of the game entirely. That just couldn't be done. I didn't want to anyway. I simply just didn't. I didn't care to partake in a different life, because it was would have been. I would have had to build up a fictional one, and then absorbed perhaps into that, but always with the fear that it might melt somewhere. Some of the false passports we used to get years ago never survived the transition to modern archiving of material. The guy I knew was coming. He'd been on a British passport issued to him under the assumed name of somebody who died at 6 months old of cot death or something like that. He'd returned from. He was coming in at Dover once after. He didn't fly. He lived in Dubai, but he didn't fly back direct. He used to go to the continent and then drive or ferry over. So he thought he was being reasonably cautious. But he just came back in and they scanned the passport. And take a seat, Mr. Smith. And it turned out that they'd finally done a match with the deaths and births. And so you get that scene where the policemen look forward to all of their careers. They love having somebody in the chair opposite saying, well, good to see you back on English soil, Mr. Smith. One small thing. Since you died at 6 months old, your health seems to have improved.
They love the movie one-liners in its catch.
They, sad to report, my complete nemesis in the American DEA never had any good one-liners. Bill Shanks, his name. He used to really go out of his way to get me in trouble, even though I had nothing. I didn't really do any business in America. I had some friends there, but I always found two things were very off-putting there. One, the sentences could be massive. Very hard to get a single cell in American prison. And the very hard to read people. I found that of a certain generation, perhaps it's even worse now, we're all actors in our own play of life, and I guess English crooks are actors in the sense too, but we can read our own people better. That's why you could smuggle drugs into Canada, say, whereas you'd find it different smuggling drugs into London. There's a communication between we British, between each other, that's subtle but there. A shared sense of humor, way of delivery, looking at the world, laughing at the world.
We know when someone's being awkward, we know when someone's being shady.
It's very cliche. So if you walk past a couple of British customs officers and exchange a glance, somehow like the fiber optics of guilt, something's exchanged there, much more so than if you walk past a Canadian one. He can't read you terribly well. What he does, you're not certain about yourself. But there's enough doubt there. You keep on walking. But I've been at Eurostar, and a couple of times they'll put plainclothes detectives down there just to see what they can see. And more than once, I've put my bag. You carry your bag through the X-ray thing there and go on board. And I've looked up, and I've seen them there. I know they're there, and I've got to decide how am I going to look at these guys? Like they don't exist. I need a prop. I need a distraction. I need something, and I've had to do that because the times they've made eye contact, even the briefest, and they've been kind of half lounging. They've been there for a couple of hours staring at people. They've looked at me and I've looked at them, and straight away there's something that says, yeah, we could play ball.
Yeah,
we could have a dance. Shall we or shall we not? And there's this thing. I've seen them go, nah, it's going to be a long day with you. We're here just to find out things. We don't want a long day, but it's going to be a long day. It's amazing how much information can be spread through in a little time like that.
Most definitely. In terms, because I mean, hearing a lot about your story, it seems like your level of involvement in the criminal world was just strictly based around sort of like the smuggling of drugs. It doesn't seem to be a lot of violence involved. Is that something that you actively ensured that you stayed out of, or was there something that you was involved in but dealt with differently to others?
Oh, that's an interesting point. I think I was around so much violence in the early days that I started to get a picture of the outcomes and the value of things. For example, I was with the group. We dropped this warehouse full of guns, so everybody was armed to the teeth like Billy the Kid. And looking back on it, the more guns we had, the more likely we were to shoot at each other, or make mistakes. I even emptied a 357 into the bedroom floor of my girlfriend, and this was above a pub with a whole lot of people. And luckily, it was 10 o'clock closing back in those days, and I ran downstairs, and it was 10 past 10. I mean, it could have been. And they never really solved any problems, and I always kind of looked at it as a complete failure if your plan or your solutions involved no other outcome than a gunfight. That's guns, but also just generally with violence. If it's an awkward kind of thing, really. It won't do you any good. If you come out on top, you'll make a sworn enemy for life. So what are you going to do? Kill them and bury the body. If it's come to that, why were they there in the first place? What have you done? Now, sometimes you have to, you can meet somebody and you know that person is a dangerous psycho, rat, who will be looking at like a fevered, rabid dog, looking at every opportunity to bleed you dry or kidnap somebody close. You've got to, even though you sound easygoing and may look like a target, you've got to think ahead enough to impress upon that person that this is the wrong way to go. Now, people who weren't willing to spend a little time on it usually went the wrong way. They'd find an excuse to get into a kind of argument with that person. So like, you sometimes see two high-level boxers or something, they'll find an excuse to touch each other out or feel it, or bring on the fight. They'll do that, but not realizing that since if you were wary enough of that person to pick the fight to test them out in the first place, then you should have been wary enough to know that they're going to hold their ground as long as they can, or fight back hard. So think it through. Where's this leading? If it's to death, then fine. Accept that from the beginning. Go get yourself an alibi. Get somebody else to bury him, and he's never seen again. If you're so convinced this person is a threat, or that they've been that much of a threat. Not so long ago, well, let's say beyond the limits of statute of limitations, not that there is one, but all right, let me frame it this way. I heard a story the other day. Some group were so worried about somebody that they wanted to arm up, and they said to protect themselves. But I pointed out you wouldn't really be doing that. Second to which, if you did pot somebody and got caught doing it, they'd want to know where all these guns came from. And it's the same to you. I'd rather not be mentioned in all of that. Oh, but nobody. Yes, I've heard that before. But it won't solve your problem. If he's that much of a threat, if you're convinced, and you can live with yourself, get rid of him now and hire somebody from outside to do it. But honestly, you're not really dealing with, if every time you come across a problem like that, you pay somebody to go and disappear somebody from the face of the earth, you're going to go through a fair bit of money if you want to get, I can get somebody for £5,000. Yeah, the kind of killer you get for £5,000 is one who will name you in great detail.
Give you a blood type and everything.
Oh yeah. He'll even have it'll have kept some fingerprints on something. Or remember that cell phone he had to have? Yeah, and you got it from and you called your mum beforehand. They're really okay. You need to make that person understand there's a lot of ways of doing it, that that it is not worth messing with you, and the most effective ways I've always found is the fear of the unknown. If you identify your friend Zip Trigger as your best friend, and old Zip, you don't want to mess with Francis because I'll just cancel that. He'll I had that on silent too. Yeah. All right. Then that alpha criminal will go and kill old Zip just to make a point to you, and now you've got somebody a never-ending problem. Where the unknown is very effective, if they think that you have close contacts with a lot of Mexicans or people who they're not used to. I mean, they might be able to handle everything London. They might be able to deal with everything down their ends. They might be able to even cope with a bit of hanky-panky in Spain or something. But the more unknown you can make it, that are your protectors, the more fearful that will be.
Yeah. Was that the case for you because you're so well connected internationally that people just knew that you had
and it was unknown. Here's the thing, they didn't know who these people were. They could come from anywhere, and I'd kind of let it be known that don't take that kid. Look, I met him years ago in the camps in Lebanon. He's a Palestinian refugee. They're all a bit funny. Make eye contact with these people. You've got a brother for life. What am I going to do? Charity case, really. Complete psycho, by the way. Oh, yeah. I just don't want to tell you what he did to people who even came up to talk to me over there. I had to stop him. Anyway, what was it? They'd know that this was one of the best. Was actually his real job was a waiter. And when I saw him, I thought, this guy could be an actor. He had this look, this intense burning. Okay, so and I used him a couple of times in that capacity to be the mystery killer. And what was good about it, you don't let them, if you're going to stage manage this thing properly, they don't hang around you, because your enemy will think, oh yeah, he's easy to get. He'll be the one first out the door and all of that. If this is somebody who's, the one close to you can be the maniac kid, but the one that's more threatening is a rather sophisticated looking avenger who slips in and out. And when this one you're trying to impress, if you have this kind of perhaps even that stage in life where almost graying at the temples, but still lithe and and you pat it. I didn't know you were in the country. Well, I hardly tell anybody, do I?
Mm.
You know, they'll think,
Yeah.
and you know, this your protector will be looking up and down at that person, and then you also let it be known that you have details about everybody and where they come from.
Yeah.
They'll just start to the build up of this information will make it
Yeah.
so that they won't try it. Now, there's no other unless you are prepared to constantly to be in that business, and then look, it won't really ever come up. The good thing about drug smuggling in business terms is people consume the evidence. It's not a lot of working hours, and mostly it's business by agreement anyway. People imagine that the greater quantities mean the at a bigger money level, the attitude's going to be hugely different than from when you buy a couple of packets off your local weekend dealer, you know, the one that sends out all those texts on Friday night.
Yeah.
Bang and shine, you know.
Now it's on social media, so now you get all over, like on Instagram and Snapchat. It's just pure plain sight advertisement. Yeah.
Yeah. It is too. And I suppose they're just being realistic. So there was a couple of dealers I knew, and I did say, look, how is it? I mean, everybody knows your business SIM card number. It's been famous. I think you brought it from Blind Freddy for a couple of thousand, and he brought it from somebody else for thousands more. This number was cherished by people for years. You know, when he went out of the business, he was able to retire on what he sold that SIM card for. That many customers knew it. It was programmed into their phones. But also, we used to say, look, the police, without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, know about this one, and the whole chain. Look, you can imagine all they'd have to do would be bring up the metadata. And they've got, in this area, phones being used that are non-registered, SIMs, pay-as-you-go, and they've got a huge number of incoming calls per hour. Those calls come in pretty much from 11 in the morning till 2 a.m. Now, this is people's regular hours anyway, but it's a bit of a late start. Everybody knows this guy doesn't come online until about midday or something. Very few outgoings on it. They know what's going on. People are ringing for to make a booking, and the runner comes down.
Yeah.
They're very traceable by that. So they could be picked up, but the police let Tony and Joe get away with it most weekends because there's thousands like them. It's not much of an arrest. They'll probably only get, they'll be lucky to get more than they could arrest one of them, and they'd be silly enough to have a sock full of packets or something like that made up.
Yeah.
But not necessarily likely they'll find that.
Yeah.
And out of there's at least 100,000 of them just like that in the country. They'd be working. No, they can get that kind pretty easily. They just don't bother. So I guess they play the odds pretty much.
What was your biggest downfall, though? Would you say what brought you down in terms of like your whole operation? Like now looking back at it.
I think certainly being pig-headed, and even though the writing was on the wall quite a few times, I should have got out of Dodge City when, my lawyer called me in once and said exactly that kind of warning. Your name's come up a couple of times in police circles, and it wouldn't have come to me, he said, unless, without a good reason.
Yeah.
Oh, I was young. I dismissed it.
You're on top of the world.
They won't get anything. He said, they don't need to get anything to arrest you. There is a conspiracy charge. What do you mean, Ralph? What does that say? Well, they'll say you made an unlawful agreement to distribute something, for example. But what, talk? No, these people will never talk. No, they talk. They couldn't shut them up. When, 7 of them, or 8, took indemnities against prosecution and spoke in the first trial. In fact, the jury didn't quite understand what that meant. When our own lawyer said, look, you've come to court, you've said all these things, you say you didn't say anything, but he said you were smuggling drugs. And yet you're saying you were a smuggler yourself. The jury thought they'd already been sent to jail and they were coming back. When they were told that they just agreed to say these things in exchange for indemnity from prosecution, they didn't like that at all. They weren't going to rely on that. But you need a long trial for that sort of thing. If people say a short trial is a good trial, it never is. The longer you can make it, the better off it's likely to go. I've often thought of writing a book of, a little guide for various levels of risk management.
Yeah. What's the reason behind that, though, in terms of like dragging it out? Like, what's the main factors behind that helping your case?
If you're in a long trial, the jury will come to see it as their trial.
Oh, okay.
If it's a short trial, they'll just come to vote on a yes, no.
Yeah.
Don't like the look of you, don't know anything about you, please say this.
That's true, yeah.
No, send him off.
Yeah,
But
I've done jury
as
service.
time goes on, and you don't accept, a lot of the time now they'll save time by doing a witness, instead of calling the witness in, because there's nothing much of contention, you accept what that witness said and we incorporate it in. Then if you're at risk of going down on something, don't. Bring that witness in. Sometimes they can say extraordinary things. Had a witness say once that picked him up in the Porsche and drove him back from the airport, drove him home and got the suitcase out of the back of the car from the trunk and gave it to him. Oh, do you remember what sort of Porsche it was? Yeah, it was one of those 911s. So he went around the back of the car, opened the trunk, took the suitcase. Yep, that's what happened. So about that? Yeah. Okay.
So the boot was at the back, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know that? And you could see the jury all talking amongst themselves before it even been talked into that corner. Saying, there's 911, there's nothing at the back.
There's no boot at the back. Yeah.
But if you let them play detective, even if it's over something trivial, they'll reward themselves by acquitting you.
Yeah.
So you manage the case so you've got a number of TKOs on points that the prosecutor won't like because they don't actually mean terribly much in the greater scheme of things, but you keep winning against these witnesses.
Yeah.
And that can often be for just really crappy things. Some inspector at a post office was supposed to do something, and you'll find that they broke a rule somewhere. And then, your lawyer can go to town on, it was only a minor rule.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, you swore under oath today. I suppose that's another minor rule too, isn't it?
Yeah.
When somebody's in a hole, I had a witness she was a courier, and quite a good one, Secretary Sue, we called her. Now, when it came time for turning against us, police managed her as best they could. They dressed her down. But they, in disclosure, we found out she had a conviction for prostitution years earlier. Wow, that was a godsend, really. Because we were able to say to Sue, Miss Knoll, you giving evidence here today in exchange for immunity so you won't go to jail. If you went to jail, I guess that'd be a lot of your time. You could say a few years behind bars, no income. Well, then it's fair to say that you wouldn't be earning money while you were in jail. I suppose not. No. So in one sense, getting that indemnity was the same as getting, £50,000 for the year's loss. Well, I didn't get any, but what would you say you would get a figure out in the air, and then relate it back to her being a prostitute, what she'd say to the clients if a client asked them to dress up, if a client asked them to pretend. So in exchange for money, you would say the following words: "I'm a milkmaid from Guernsey, and I will tug your udder." And their evidence was no good on that. And the jury in the long trial became very much their own gang. They asked questions, quite good ones, of the judge about the trial. They went out, came back, said we're deadlocked. Judge sent them back out. Wasn't going to blow a $4 million trial on half.
Is that how much they spent on your trial?
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
I mean, they had all this ridiculous SWAT team business going on with
transporting
Supermax, and because they had no drugs, they managed to. They went to Thailand, got a license to bring in 2 kilos, brought it back and put it on a stand in the courtroom, on a special little podium, and had another SWAT team transport the 2 kilos of heroin in and out of court every day. Now we objected, saying, well, what exactly is this supposed to be? And judges, being what they are always in favour of the prosecution, said, well, what's that? I haven't noticed anything. That 2 kilos steaming away like cow shit over there in the corner. Oh, didn't notice it? Really? Well, the jury damn well did. What is it? What do you say? It's an example, Your Honour, of what, had to visualise what 2 kilos would look like, suitcase. Anyway, they got their value out of it and they finally took it away. But the other side, generally, unless they're incompetent, know how to manage too. But this jury, when they were sent back, saying, no, that's not good, you've got to think harder and try and reach agreement, they didn't like being told what to do. I didn't like it at all. So they came back and said, can we handle any of the exhibits? We want to look at them. Yeah. Well, for a start, we'll take that $65,000 you took out of David's office there, and that 2 kilos of heroin. Some of us want to examine that in the jury room.
Never to be seen again.
My kind of people, Michael, I always told you that. One of them, we were allowed to refuse up to 12 of the jurors between us, because there was only 4 left on trial out of 16. And one of them was a hippie on trial, I mean. But and one guy walked past the jury box on the way to the jury box, looked at me and signaled me. I said to him, what the fuck's that? Don't challenge him. You don't want him. What do you mean? Well, if he's signaling you, he wants to be on the trial. I said, I don't know. He looked all right to me. No, challenge him. So I challenged him. Wouldn't believe it. I met George like 4 years later in a prison somewhere. He'd been convicted of an armed robbery. He said, I signaled the fuck out of him. What else was I supposed to do? Wear a pink dress. I said, yeah. And he would have held out. So some of the jury were holding out. They held out day after day after day. Even on a Saturday, they came in. And the judge, we got to the end of the Saturday, still no answer.
Yeah.
Oh, the jury wanted to say something. A verdict? Seems not. Don't know. Jury said, look, we've been working very hard on this. We'll have Sunday off. But sorry, you can't go home. You're sequestered when you're deliberating. Well, we don't want to stay in the hotel anymore. We're sick of that. They organised a picnic for them on the Sunday and entertainment for the day too. So when they returned finally and started giving a not guilty on count 1, 2, 3, 4, I thought that's about right. Except they found me guilty on one of them, where a courier had been arrested with a couple of kilos of dope, which I always thought was the most dangerous count. But I realized I just didn't go. An old lawyer pointed out to me that you can never go too extreme with your defense. What? say that aliens picked me up, brainwashed me, and made me do it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't dismiss it if I were you. We ran things. You could, if you tell a jury that it was all a CIA plot, as dismissive as some of them will be, you'll get a few of them start to accept it.
Yeah. Was that because what was happening in America at the time, and we're finding out about how the CIA and FBI were involved in?
Yeah, you still have to read the times that you're living in.
Yeah.
You know, it must be not too stale, a kind of a defense. You must have give it some currency. If you look at some of the big acquittals, I mean, they're different country to country. Generally, jury verdicts here are, I always thought, a little more considered. But then again, the juries can be very mixed. I mean, there was a time that in an English jury that you'd never get them to cross the police or anything like that.
Yeah.
But then again, there was a time they were always crossing the police after they got caught, fitting up people from bombings and things in Northern Ireland and so on. And now, the last jury I had in this country was a real grab bag of people from Europe. It was a London trial, so I should have expected that. But rather had to deal with Swedes and thing on a jury. For example, the Swedish system, a jury's got a say in your sentence. And I think that'd be a dangerous thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because a lot of them would find you guilty, thinking, I'll find him guilty, but I'm only going to give him 3 months as a lesson. There's good reason I think they shouldn't have the jury involved in sentencing, because they're likely to convict. But then again, the whole Scandinavian system is very weird anyway. I think up until recently they've had people on, if you're arrested there, you go straight into solitary and you're not allowed to speak to anybody except your lawyer until the trial's over.
Wow.
You want to see family, they have to visit you in a police station. They'll take you from the jail to the police station.
Yeah.
With the police sitting in the same room, they can talk to you.
How long did they sentence you for after that whole trial? And how long did the trial last for?
That one, the big one.
Yeah, the big one, yeah. How long was the trial?
That went for over 6 months.
Oh, 6 months, okay.
And that was, every day.
Yeah.
Except for weekends. I was given... even the one conviction was enough for old Judge Murray, who detested me. And he thought we were manipulators, and I was the worst of them. Okay, we did get caught singing to the jury at one stage. It was an old nylon song. I'm not that kind of guy.
Who was singing?
The jury used to come in after lunch and stand around looking embarrassed in the jury box and sit down. We'd be there, and the judge hadn't turned up yet, so we'd be waiting a few minutes. So
you serenaded them.
You start tapping. Hassan, you're not a very good singer. You're going to have to just tap it out. And that nylon song's really good because it comes in as a harmony and a chorus and all of that kind of thing. And I mean, it was stupid and comic, but when the judge found out, he said to the jury, I said, there'll be no more singing to this jury. So they really, and I was allowed, back in those days, you could give, without being cross-examined, you could give statements from the dock. And so I gave one, all right. I spoke for 3 days. Wandered all over the place, made speeches about everything from being influenced by Bugs Bunny to...
Bugs Bunny?
Well, it was a big influence, I must say. Not so much Bugs Bunny himself, but Daffy Duck. He was such a greedy slob. And, some of those old cartoons were very cruel. I remember one where the big dog keeps a mouse and a cat prisoner somewhere and only lets them out to go and get rewarded for... the cat gets rewarded for catching the mouse and gets a plate of food, and the big dog comes and eats it and all of that. Or the more... I think physics comes into it. Foghorn Leghorn. You ever seen any of his? He's a big loudmouth chicken from Georgia or down south somewhere, and the little nerdy kid who works things out on a pencil, and the kid he tries to play with the little kid, but he's always working out ways to win the game with numbers. I think they're all from the 1950s, when in America they kind of tried to big up their science a bit because they had the bomb first, and it wasn't such a bad thing to be. Well, wasn't it they always, you could identify the Nazi in an old-fashioned movie by the one who comes up with an accent and says, "Oh yes," to people on a train, "Papers, please, identify yourself." Which, and of course, there's no need for ID cards anymore because everything about somebody's life is just a click away. All the credit agencies use Google and particularly Facebook. If you apply for a loan, even if you've got a blemish-free, no bad thing on your record whatsoever, because if you're not on Facebook, they want to know why. I've got a few American correspondents who say that they try and live off the grid, but all they do is make their own lives more difficult for them and look suspicious. I do a lot of signed books, and just to make it a bit more interesting, I'll write something particular to that person. So I ask them to tell me a little bit about themselves. And sometimes when that's not very helpful, I'll just click them up and see what kind of electronic footprint they've left. And the ones where there's nothing and nothing at all, or something, and there's not even a joke icon, on the top of a WhatsApp thing, somebody put a funny little picture there, or maybe themselves, but it's so tiny you're more likely to put a joke thing there, where it could be identified. And I don't know, something's coming up with your name on it saying reply to something. You're secretly asking me questions. But people, do you think it's a bad thing where people have lost their
to an extent. So the downside to it that I see is the power that gives the social media companies, and the influence that they have over our lives and our decision making. I understand having to give up some of your privacy and some of your information for, registration of stuff, and governments being able to track stuff, or for security reasons or policing reasons. But when it comes to social media companies being able to influence and advertise stuff based on our digital print, it then puts us in a strange category where we think we live in an autonomous environment where we make the decisions, but nonetheless the decisions are being influenced upon us. So I don't know if you've seen Social Dilemma, which is on Netflix. It's an excellent documentary, and it's in regards to big tech, the three big ones: Google, Facebook, Twitter, and it's about it's from ex-employees talking about how they go about like controlling and influencing people to make decisions. It's almost as if they got voodoo dolls of every single individual, and they know what makes you tick. They know what gets you going, and all they have to do is to prod it, and then you're active and you're doing whatever it is that they want you to do. So
I
you
can
might
see that. Excuse me, working. Can you imagine? I've always thought that if you wanted to create an algorithm to analyze people based on what they do on their computers, okay, the younger ones use it almost exclusively their phones, and that's the same thing. If you could get into the camera on that'd be good too, because you'll see the eye movements over the screen. Follow a kind of pattern and tell you something about the person. The way the speed at which they click on something compared to when they first was brought to their attention must mean something. Their mannerisms and keyboard tone, where you could certainly predict, I would think, how somebody would vote for sure, though often that decision is last minute and capricious and just, look, we voted, when I say we, half the country voted to get out of Europe. on no more basis, in my view, than just to tickle the government's bum, because that's they were asking us to stay and just to put the finger up to the government. A lot of people said, "No, get out of Europe."
Yeah.
Regretting it, I suppose, most of them. But that that level of I've always thought as in the old days, I used to be able to get a false passport simply on the basis of a birth certificate, and to back it up, maybe a bank account and I don't know, a library card and some other bit of get on the electoral roll. That was it.
Yeah.
But now, if I wanted to set up other identities into which I could escape from a world I didn't want to be part of anymore, I'd realize I'd have to think 2 or 3 years in advance. I'd have to start a Google and Facebook account in those names and give them a kind of a life. Because whether they want to accept it or not, and perhaps this film you're talking about makes the exact same point, we all know that with any technology, if it can be done, it will be done.
Yeah.
Somebody, somewhere, you can legislate the hell out of things, and somewhere somebody will be doing it by another name. They'll say, we'll anonymize this, or whatever the hell. It won't mean anything. Still able to very accurately predict a person's characteristics by the way they physically do things as well, with what's in front of them, their touch on the screen. I don't know, did the film go into that part?
It did actually, yeah, and that's something that I do as well in terms of the line of work I do. So it's like you can check the back end of a website to see people's movements and how quickly they click on stuff, as you just mentioned. But to me, the danger comes down to who then controls this power and what's their main purpose. And we know that with social media companies, their purpose is to keep your eyes on their platforms and as long as possible. They want to keep you there as long as possible so that they can pay, advertisers can pay them more money and so forth. So they never necessarily regulate what it is that you're watching. All they care about is that they find out what ticks you, what keeps you going, and what keeps your attention span on there, and then they keep pumping you to it. So I was recently reading this interesting article in regards to the link between anti-vaxxers and stay-at-home mums. And it shows that like with a lot of stay-at-home moms who like new parents and newly mothers for the first time, their main concern is their children. So they'll go online and do research in regards to vaccines that their children have been asked to come and get. And what that then leads to now is that the algorithm on Facebook, for instance, might know that the big topic of discussion at the moment is all of the conspiracy behind vaccinations.
Right.
So now these stay-at-home mothers are being drawn into a world which they might not have known about previously. So then they get caught up and start watching more videos, and then the algorithm will start pumping you with more stuff because they know you're getting addicted to this information. So then you have a whole line of stay-at-home mothers who are now super anti-vaxxers, not because of that was their line of interest before, but it's just because they've been drawn into it due to the circumstances that they're in, and now they've been caught by the system, with a system which only cares about your attention and then sponsors paying them. So it's who controls it. What's the legislation that keeps those companies and powerhouses away from abusing that power?
I think that just the way that question's been raised opens that difficulty. If information exists and it's there, we can pass laws that restrict access, but that will fail because somebody will have access, and therefore everybody has access by means one way or another, even if they backdoor it out there by pseudo anonymizing it before it gets squeezed out, and then at the other end they re-identify. Now, how can you pass a law saying and covering every use for information that you don't want them to do, while on the other hand allowing them to do the stuff that's good for them to do? Like if we could predict that a certain exposure to substance X or lifestyle Y can make you have a 20% greater likelihood of succumbing to Alzheimer's. And you can identify Alzheimer's by all the information you have, that it's it's not even early onset. It's in the future, but reliably predictable if you have access to the works. Now, everybody presumably would say, yeah, if you could bypass that risk of somebody getting it, yeah, they should be allowed. But that information is exactly the same information that the person who wants to manipulate your behavior can do.
Yeah.
And this is not entirely a new idea. When I joined a kind of very big advertising company when I was about 19, we were sent on a course, an American company, called Belief Dynamics.
Very American.
ACS Advertising.
Yeah.
The corporation with a heart. So what it taught was the best bits of the US Psychological Warfare Department combined with case studies of behavior analysis. And as far as advertising was concerned, it was that you were spending too much time trying to change what somebody believes. What you do is make the thing that you want them to do, buy their stuff, seem part of what they already believe. So you corrupt their existing belief system into incorporating product X. And so it was quite a useful bit of training, I thought. Some of it was very obvious, but on the other hand, some of it was less so. But I would think that there will be. I don't think. The expression is always, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's very hard to put him back in. I think this one's escaped a long time ago now. Really.
Yeah, it's
and
it's out of our hands now.
We just have to, and you can't help an idiot, really. If you can warn them to hell, but if no, they say, that's the way I feel about it, I'd rather take option X or something. They might have been manipulated into feeling that way, but then again, I think sometimes we tend to blame the technology because it's new. People thought the telephone was an evil thing being in people's house.
TVs as well.
TV was actually watching you for a long time. Now when TVs are watching you, people don't pay any attention. Because there's something other. If we pick anything, look at the two things that were modern and scary and unknown. 5G networks and a virus, and that was kind of very inscrutable, this virus, and vaguely connected with inscrutable Asiatics and Dr. Wu in some laboratory somewhere. It had all the perfect sort of alignment of fears to make people feel bad about it. But in as much as we can't shoot the messenger, we can't really moan too much about something that look, people will say to each other, funny thing, I looked up dining chairs the other day, and now I can't get anything on Facebook which doesn't have ads all down the side of it about dining chairs.
Yeah.
And you think, well, fine, but did you click on one of them just to see whether that would actually fit? Well, I did, but I don't like.
Yeah.
People kind of want the services, but want to be courted first,
Yeah. Have you tested out the voice test? So there's this system. I've done it several times, but only once it's worked. So what you do is you open up several apps on your phone, and then make a phone call to someone whilst the apps are still open, and say, I need a new suit. I've been wanting a wedding suit. My mate's wedding is coming up, wherever. You have a minute conversation, and then when you go back to the app, supposedly you're meant to be inundated with all the things that you were talking about on your phone because they're listening to the conversation for keywords. I've tried it several times, gazillion times, and only on one occasion I saw one little ad. So I'm not sure how how much of a coincidence that was, but that's supposed to be the new thing, that everything's being listened to and we're waiting for it waits for keywords in order to then inundate you with advertisement.
I think that we're also perhaps a little too willing to give credit to devices that would be, I've always thought that one of and I've looked at this even in the smuggling days. Was it cost effective for the police to be taking these measures against me or anybody for that matter? And if it didn't measure up on the economics test, then I generally dismiss it. This would be too expensive to run, so don't worry about it. And I think that applies to a lot of conspiracy theories and also to certain elements of technology. That somebody asked, if you the other day was asking about, isn't it harder to cross borders with face recognition technology? Well, face recognition technology is pretty hopeless. It struggles with matching the biometrics of your passport to your face in front of them.
Yeah, I'm always having to move to the other side after trying to scan my passport. Yeah,
because all they've got on that chip is they've taken the original photo that you applied for the thing with, and they've measured what a machine can read, and it can only read things that contrast. So it can read the pupil in the eyes and the distance between, and it can guess at where the bottom of our ears stop and sort of see the nostrils and have a pretty good stab in the dark about, what's the end of the chin and the top of something else. And you're not allowed to smile or, do anything to distort these things. So if you stand in front of the machine that reads your passport at the airport to come back, you don't have to put on much of a smile for it to give a false reading. I mean, they're trying to improve on these things, but all they're doing in this case is trying to match two sets of numbers, the one they get from the camera in front of you, face on, with the one they got from the picture, face on. To look across at a crowd on millions of angles, on fleeting frames which are probably blurry because of movements. You need so much to give that any semblance of accuracy to identify anybody. You could maybe, if you or I were super wanted, you could maybe set up your biometrics so that they could reduce it to a short list of 1,000 people every day who went through Waterloo Station or something like that with some characteristics to say. I mean, the manner of the way people walk is another thing, and move their hands. But you need quite a lot of data to rule out you can't do it with just a few seconds worth. Especially the way somebody walks or moves their hands. It's there to be got. But certainly from an advertiser's point of view, there's a lot of easier ways, as you know, to tailor ads to what you might be looking for. There's and pretty much just based on your searches on other platforms will do it.
Yeah.
That's how I think that. I don't know how much of I'm sure they use the amount of time you spend as well.
Yes, yeah. I think time is the most essential part when it comes to the metrics now. It's about how much time you spend on it. So, I mean, I spend most of my days watching documentaries. I don't hardly watch any TV. I can watch about 10 documentaries in a day, or just have it playing in the background. So I'm always being inundated with documentaries, but it's always documentaries that I want to watch, because obviously it's been
look at that YouTube. I mean, YouTube throw up to me. Often as not, something I'm vaguely interested in watching. I typed in. I half caught a bit of. I was driving back from somewhere the other day, and it was difficult. And I caught the tail end of Science in Action, and I think I heard somebody talking about an emergent property of entanglement being time, and I wanted to really try and understand more of what that meant, because those things are not, straight away you can grab them. And a couple of searches later, and I'll have in my options, YouTube will have some sign. But I want that. I don't mind it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
I
thing.
don't
Yeah.
think young people do, and I think they're willing to. Just the idea that they're. I think. Do you think they believe that their lack of privacy and the fact that somebody is interested in what they choose
Mm.
is one step on the ladder to fame for them,
I
rather
think
than a
so.
threat?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, because we live in an era where people know how easy it is to potentially go viral and potentially change your life with one clip, one soundbite. So everyone's kind of fighting in this space to get famous. So they don't mind. Their information is out there anyway. You can go into anyone's Instagram and literally they'll have their whole life pulled out there. Every time they have an argument with their missus or with their partner, there's a statement out there. There's something. No one likes privacy anymore. And I think also reality TV shows has played a part in that as well. That you can put out your day-to-day life out there and it's fine. It's becoming culture now. It's becoming the norm. So we're used to going online and seeing people live out their day-to-day lives with their families around. So it's changing the scope of culture and how we see privacy. It's kind of like
Well,
it's
even the fact that Gogglebox has got an
Google Box. Yeah,
entertainment value.
yeah,
Who would have thought if somebody had suggested to you, oh, look, we'll
yeah,
get quite a high audience of having
yeah.
people sit around watching television? You say,
Hmm.
well, I don't know about that. You
That's weird.
know?
Why do I want to watch someone? Yeah, my
Yeah.
sister actually made a suggestion that to get me and my family on Google Books, but then we realized that you can't actually apply for it. They find random people on the street. So this was something that I would have potentially ended up being on had that been successful. So
Yeah, no, what we've got to think of is an alternative to a
yeah,
Gogglebox, something we can do online
oh,
where it would be entertaining enough.
yeah.
What we're doing now, which I'm sure is hugely entertaining to a lot of
Yeah,
people.
most definitely. Because I mean, I enjoy podcasts. I really, really do. Apart from doing them myself, I love listening to them. So on my car rides, I'm always on my Spotify listening to people having conversations about all sorts of stuff. And it's strange because I find myself finding things that I wouldn't do on my day-to-day life entertaining. Like there is there's podcast about meditation. I'm not a meditator myself, but I'll listen to these ladies talk about meditation for an hour.
Right. Well,
Just
I think most people listen to. Originally, a podcast was audio only, but
mm,
now it applies to our videos, and I think most people simply listen to. They certainly listen to mine more than they watch.
mm.
I could have, a grizzly bear walk across the back of my green screen, and nobody would think anything of it.
Yeah,
Just about 90% do the listening.
yeah,
Um, and and even I notice in publishing that's changed too now. Um, if I'm scrambling to get all the audio books done because um, most of the people who would like to read what I say simply don't have downtime where they can sit and read a
mm,
book. I mean,
yeah,
I'm bad enough myself. I fall asleep if I'm trying to read. I've got
yeah,
things by my bed that'll never get read.
yeah,
Famously, Stephen Hawking's book was a bestseller with never being read. A Short History of Time has been read by 1 in 100 of people who've ever bought it.
wow,
Have actually read the thing.
yeah,
The audio book, fortunately not narrated by his voice synthesizer,
mm,
is sells a lot better than his. And I think I would say to anybody who thought of had ambitions of doing any kind of writing, they would be best thinking of how it's going to sound narrated,
yeah,
because I've had to really adjust my writing style to suit the narration um,
mm,
to somewhat because um, some things read better or differently than they are spoken, so it
yeah,
kind of fails that test. But um, all the big publishing houses have gone belly up, and
yeah,
um, they won't take on anybody unless that person is it's a celebrity or a celebrity story ghosted by somebody, or sort of loosely in the celebrity self-help,
yeah,
do-it-yourself cooking
yeah,
fitness.
Or fitness, yeah, fitness is a big one.
Um,
Where they'll go and get surgery and then release a fitness book about how they exercise like 20 times a day.
yeah, and you can come up with um, joke titles and it'll catch people's attention, though they always have. What was it? Something called "Why I Really Don't Give a Fuck" or something. There was some book like that.
How to not give a fuck.
Oh yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the person obviously gave one enough to substitute the "you" in the word in question with an
Yeah.
asterisk.
Yeah.
So kind of
True.
defeated the purpose. Reminds me of one of the Chicago 7, Abby Hoffman, wrote a book called "Steal This Book," encouraging readers not to pay for it and support the man, Big Brother, and all of that. I don't think it's not Big Brother, the TV show, is known to a lot of people, but very few know that it's based on Orwell's 1948 book.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They have the sense of big. I don't know. In fact, I've really been meaning to ask somebody who didn't know the connection with the book what they thought the Big Brother part of it meant. It refers to the camera on them 24/7.
Yeah, the camera.
But in George Orwell's book 1984, it was written in 48, and so it's 1948 backwards with a 40. People's lives are very controlled and regulated, and their televisions are in their homes, but to watch them, to make sure they behave themselves. So it was a Dutch TV programmers who first came out with Big Brother, the show. But they, so the idea was it was going to be how would people react with a camera on them 24/7. But you know now they'll perform like little cougars.
That's the thing. And I think the performance side comes from, I think the allure of like reward at the end, celebrity, the potential,
the winner
potential to advertise. Yeah, the winner, the potential to advertise tea for 200 grand a picture on Instagram or something. So that allure was a big drive.
Even if somebody was a bit of a nobody, if they come out of "I'm a celebrity,"
you're somebody. Yeah.
Get me out of here. They can then write the book, "How I Survived Being a Celebrity."
Yeah.
Out of here.
What do you think going forward we can do? What do you think going forward is going to happen in relations to like our privacy? Is it going to be a case where everyone's just going to be this guinea pig in a big tub of like Big Brothers watching us 24/7, and we're just going to become accustomed to it? It's going to be like, have you seen the Minority Report, the movie?
Yes.
Yeah. So are we going to live in a similar sort of world?
I think we have to rein in our fears with a bit of economic application here. What it'll be worth doing. After all, there's 7 billion people on the planet. The people won't seem to worry about it too much, but look, the old thing is, isn't it? If you're not doing anything bad, you've got nothing to worry about. Well, that's not really the case. Certainly, if somebody who's in control of these things, even as just some pen pusher somewhere, decides to mess you up, they can throw your name in the wrong place, and everything will sort of blow out backwards. Your credit will be no good, and you'll be on a suspect list, and all of that kind of thing. But it's the horse is bolted on that one. That we have no privacy and not likely to get any, just out of the sense of having a B plan. I think people would be wise to find a country of citizenship that they might otherwise didn't realize they're entitled to. Boris's father is getting himself a French passport.
He bought it out here really quick. I mean, Ghana is in my reef, so my family's originally from Ghana, so I'm like, worst case scenario,
get one of those.
I'm working on getting my Ghanaian passport as we speak, so I'm going to be a dual citizen, and if worst case scenario, I'll just go back home.
There's that, but here's the other thing you can do. Somewhere along the line, you get a name change. It might be easier to do it here than there. It's certainly easy to do here. But in whichever case you do it, you go park it up in the place that you've got eyes of becoming a citizen of. I'd probably go in my case for Irish, and park something there. So it looks like you've been a resident for 3 years or some such. Alternatively, Portugal is quite good because you can become a citizen quite quickly there.
Okay.
So if you say that you've been, they don't know any different, that you've been there for, there's another disadvantage of getting out of the European Union, but still, there's ways around all that. I sense a video coming up on that one. You have that. It's really yourself, but another alter ego, I guess, because you've had a name change along the way there. The only thing holding it with immovable information is a date of birth. So who knows?
Yeah.
And that way you've got somewhere to run. But I think in terms of bad things that can happen, I think we can always say this about the world: no matter how intrusive the search and the examination, we can always relax to some extent because we can rely upon human incompetence and half-wittedness never to do the job quite right.
That's true.
And we should never, for that matter, never blame on, if you think somebody's out to get you, should never attribute to malice what should be better cast to mere stupidity and incompetence.
Yeah.
And that is usually the case too.
That's until AI completely takes over. So yeah, that's most definitely the one. But in conclusion of today, I just wanted to ask you one
Yes,
final
we are
question.
getting a little bit on with time here.
Yeah, we done well actually, 3.5 hours, which is my longest so far. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can definitely talk to you.
Oh, you might be able to edit to we can put a middle in there if you want.
Yeah, I'll split that. Yeah. I was going to ask you. So, what would you say is some of the greatest lessons you've learned from your life experience, like through everything that you've been through? And
Okay, there's quite a few, but to flatten them down, don't take any wooden currency. That's one thing. Yeah. More seriously than that, you should look back on a life and be surprised at the number of people you can forgive. And if you look back and you're surprised at the number of people you can't forgive, I think you've been doing something, inextricably wrong. Not to be too quick to judge on anything, and certainly never act on the date. You know how they always say sleep on it? They say that for damn good reason. It's almost always worth. They never take an action that's immediate. And thirdly, here's probably the widest, greatest thing. Enjoy the moments if we have them in this slice of human history and time, because I've lived through from 1950 through till now, and I hope to keep going till 2050 at least, with some drooling through my napkin or having spoon-fed my porridge. There will come a time when you mentioned AI. There will come a time when AI's cracked that little barrier of being able to teach itself things that it needs to know, and postulate on things and find novel solutions. After all, we're basically a machine that thinks itself as conscious because when we dream, we can imagine things that are a surprise to us. Our brains are that compartmentalized. I mean, you think it's extraordinary that a consciousness, you probably had them too. You've had dreams in which the outcome of it was a surprise.
Yeah.
And so some part of your mind has kept something from you, has known in advance and decided to keep that little surprise for you later on.
Yeah.
Now, when the machines can, and it feels like one big one, but of course, and it won't be far off it. once the machines reach that level of sophistication, all human activity ceases to be of any significance in terms of having dire outcomes or life-threatening or fearful things. We will only have to rein in the speed of this great mind we create, which will solve our power problems, our food problems, and everything else. There will be generations born, and I don't like these future predictors because they don't go far enough. There will be people born to whom the idea of eating a dead animal will be so sick and alien. Oh, sure, as we're growing the nutritious protein meat substitute that we will get in 20, 30 years, at first they'll be stamped out to look like little steaks and little chickens. But when a generation of kids say, what the hell does that look like a chicken for?
Yeah.
Why are you making our food imitate, bits of animals? It's all right in Cheerios, but we don't like it on a big slab on the plate.
Yeah.
With pretend veins going through it. When all of that's gone, there won't really be any truly threatening things because you'll be safe in every instance. The world population will shrink down to about 7 million and then bounce back up and stabilize at 10. I say that because people will have less than 2 children to replace the stock. But the stock will be, at some point, never-ending growing, because short of being obliterated in some atomic accident or something, we'll near enough live forever as our minds will be transferred to a sort of semi-biotic human look-alike. And in my old line of work, it'll all be gone with the wind, because as soon as they wire in little tiny threads that stimulate the nerves within the brains, all of those drugs will be delivered by stimulants.
Straight to you.
And there'll be underground programs for a while on ecstasy programs that people will be furtively selling to each other until somebody tells you to take your finger off the pleasure button, which some people will be reluctant to do. And I can understand why, because for those of us who might chase supreme joy, living your life without it, staring at each other, just wait until you can get back in your electro cupboard to live a simulated life or press that pleasure button again. We are living at the best time. Really, I can even crack the date. We'll say 1945. Why? Because the worst of the world wars was coming to an end, and penicillin, hallelujah, brothers and sisters, was available and working. Now, we can take from there on end for a couple of 100 years to be the best time of humanity. And I think I mentioned to you in an email that all the things we hold as wild injustices and terrible things that we have to correct in the world, there'll be generations that look back fondly and say, oh, that's when we gave a shit about anything. There's nothing wrong. Everything's managed. I can even take the non-management switch off for a thrill, but I know it's fake. If I really get myself in trouble hanging over a railway track, even though they're all underground, emergency switches will go in on that program and stop me from going overboard. In fact, don't you think, Francis, that in 500 years' time, facing a near eternity of a single consciousness existence as you go on, people's entertainments, sure, there'll be simulated realities, but there'll be more than that. The only one you'd find in your future self as remotely entertaining is one in which you didn't know it was a simulation. You're not allowed to know until the end of it. Otherwise, you have no fear of death. It's just like watching a movie. It's just a sideshow. Only one in which you truly believe that this is you and you've grown up. Now, some scientists say, oh, you can't simulate a whole universe like that, but we're not. we're just simulating the stimulus to Francis's brain as this
So I can have the whole,
perception of
I can have
the
the whole
reality.
perception, so I can have the whole experience internally without having to leave the comfort of my home.
No.
Yeah.
And what would be the period that you choose to go to? Ancient Rome, probably, at some point. Han Dynasty China, why not? But you'd certainly pick the 20th and 21st century, probably the 20th century, and not far afterwards, to do it. So troubling as it may be, either we're alone in the universe, Francis, or you're living your simulation as one of your entertainments, and I'm just part of it.
Well, that's a mind boggle to leave me with.